Anirban, you can start.
Is it fine? Am I visible and audible enough?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, thanks to all of you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome all of you to the sixth day of this add-on course dealing with the history of English literature organized by the Department of English, Krishna Chandra College under the aegis of IQAC. Today, in this session, we have with us Dr. Arindam Ghosh, the coordinator and also the head of the Department of English. We also have Mr. Mohananda Barman, faculty member and the convener of this add-on course, and Mr. Naeem Akhtar, the senior faculty member of the Department of English and also the joint convener of this add-on course.
স্যার জোরে বলুন, কথাগুলো শোনা যাচ্ছে না।
কথা শোনা যাচ্ছে না?
না না, শোনা যাচ্ছে। অনির্বাণ,
ঠিক আছে, ঠিক আছে, অলরাইট, ইটস অলরাইট।
Okay. Now it is the high time to heartily welcome our honorable guest speaker of today's session, Ms. Abhinanda Chakraborty, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Chandidas Mahavidyalaya, Khujutipara, Birbhum. Today in this session, she will enrich us by her enlightening lecture on Victorian poetry, precisely the poetry written during the reign of Queen Victoria from 1837 to 1901. So, Madam, a very warm welcome to you in our college virtually, and on behalf of the entire English department, we extend our sincere thanks to you to grace this session with your precious presence. I, Anirban Singho, Secretary of this add-on course, heartily welcome you and kindly request you to enrich this session with your valuable insights. Thank you. Thanks, Madam. And you please now proceed.
Thank you, Anirban, for those very, very kind words.
One second, আমার মনে অনির্বাণ একটু বলতে ভুলে গেছে। আমি একবার জাস্ট অভিনন্দার বায়োগ্রাফিক্যাল ডিটেইলস একটু বলে দিই, বলে তারপরে অভিনন্দা will proceed.
Sorry. I'm
No.
sorry for
No. It's fine.
Now, Arindam, you please introduce her in front of us. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, thank you, Abhinanda. Once again, I cordially welcome you virtually to our college. To give a brief biographical note on Abhinanda Chakraborty, she is a dedicated academician and currently serving as an assistant professor in the Department of English at Chandidas Mahavidyalaya, located in Khujutipara, Birbhum, you all know. And Mohananda is a student of, Abhinanda is a student of prestigious Presidency College, Calcutta. And she has graduated from there in 2009 and have done her master's in 2011. And she is currently pursuing her Ph.D. On Psychogeography and Ruskin Bond from the Vidyasagar University. And she's also been a winner of many awards like the prestigious Charu Chandra Ghosh Memorial Prize, Narayan Chandra Ghosh Memorial Prize, Professor Amol Bhattacharya Memorial Prize, and many others. And she has published in a prolific way in many journals, as well as she has presented in many seminars. So thank you, Abhinanda. Welcome to our college. Now we can proceed. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arindam. It's a
Yes.
great pleasure to be a part of something so intellectually stimulating. And I would like to begin by congratulating you and all the other faculty members for having organized something so useful. I think more than anything else, because I think you would agree with me here that since the CBCS system has been introduced, even though it has done a lot of good, but I think one of the major places where it has lacked is the part where we covered the history of English literature. And this is absolutely important because there can never be any text without the context. And therefore, I think it is, always our responsibility to fill that gap in when we are teaching our students. So to organize something so brilliant is something I think that all other colleges should take up, a similar initiative so that students can greatly benefit from such initiatives. So thank you, Arindam, and thank you once again for inviting me to be a part of this. It's my absolute pleasure. I think I have about 1.5 or 2 hours for this.
You have almost 2 hours with you, so you can.
All
continue.
right. So I will try and keep my discussion to the point. A very good afternoon to all the students who are present here. আমি কি বাংলা ইংলিশ মিক্স করে বলি অরিন্দম ইজ দ্যাট ওকে
Definitely.
Okay, I think that-
তুমি বাংলা ইংরেজি দুটোই মিক্স করে বলো।
Right. Thank you. Okay, so once again, good afternoon to all the students who are gathered here. আমরা আজকে এখানে ডিসকাস করতে চলেছি Victorian poetry. Okay, now although it is, I would personally feel that this is a topic that we can only get into. It's very difficult to do justice to something as broad and extensive within a space of 2 hours, not even 4 hours, not even 8 hours or 8 days would do justice to it because of the sheer variety and the range of writing that characterizes this period. But আমি ধরে নিচ্ছি যে তোমাদের আরো অনেক যেহেতু lectures হয়েছে on other periods of English literature. So I would first start with a brief introduction to this period. I also have a PPT which I will be showing shortly to supplement my lecture. Before I go directly into the Victorian period, আমি একটা একটু কনটেক্সটের ইয়েতে বলছি, ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ডে বলছি। মেনি অফ দ্য স্টুডেন্টস, আরেকটা কোয়েশ্চেন অরিন্দম, একটু এক সেকেন্ড, যে এখানে কোন সমস্ত কি ফার্স্ট সেকেন্ড সেমেস্টারের স্টুডেন্টস রয়েছে নাকি আরো সিনিয়র সেমেস্টারসও রয়েছে?
মোস্টলি আন্ডারগ্র্যাজুয়েট স্টুডেন্টস অফ অল সেমেস্টার্স, আর তার সঙ্গে কয়েকজন রয়েছে ফ্রম বিশ্ববঙ্গ ইউনিভার্সিটি and from other colleges, basically undergraduate students. Okay,
but মোটামুটি 5th 6th সেমেস্টার অবধিও রয়েছে।
5th 6th সেমেস্টার অবধি সবাই রয়েছে।
Right. Thank you. So the reason for me asking this is because I would like to make quite a few references, and হয়তো 4th 5th 6th সেমেস্টারের হয়তো স্টুডেন্টসরা হবে, তাদের পক্ষে হয়তো এটা ক্যাচ করাটা রেফারেন্সেস গুলো ইজিয়ার হবে, but I will try to keep it basic so that even those who do not have too much exposure to this as yet might be able to make sense of it. আচ্ছা, আরেকটা রিকোয়েস্ট স্টুডেন্টসদেরকে, যখন আমি বলছি যদি কোনো পার্ট বুঝতে না পারো, যদি ক্লিয়ার না হয়, do kindly raise your hand or feel free to interrupt me, no problem. But যেটা বোঝাচ্ছি সেটা যদি বুঝতে না পারা যায় তাহলে হয়তো লেকচারটার পয়েন্টটাই will be missing. Okay, so please feel free. I will not mind at all. I will not mind in the least. আমি আগে থেকেই বলে দিচ্ছি, যেখানে কনফিউশন হবে সেখানে আমাকে স্টপ করে জিজ্ঞেস করো যে ম্যাম ক্লিয়ার হলো না, একটু আরেকবার এটা রিপিট করুন। Okay, so I will also know that way that you are involved and you are not merely looking through your reels while I'm spending my time here trying to make a period long gone relevant to those who are sitting here. All right, yes, okay, yes, Asia, I can see that you're here. Right, I can see some of my own students gathered over here, so welcome to all of them. Now so before we go into Victorian poetry, it is important to remember the period that came before. Now, who can tell me here? Of course, you already know. I will try to make this a little interactive so it doesn't get boring. So who can tell me what is the major literary period that comes before the Victorian period? You can text, you can unmute, answer, you can do whatever. Immediately Victorian এর আগে
Ma'am,
কোনটা?
romantic period.
Very good. Wahida, Sultana, Wahida, romantic. Samuel, Sunita, Urmimala. Very good, very good. Yes. The romantic period. So I think if you are, students of the senior semesters, you are already aware because you have gone through, the fourth semester, you have done your romantic poetry and you know what were the qualities that characterized romantic poetry. You know about, Wordsworth's definition of poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions recollected in tranquility, as he wrote in the very famous preface to the lyrical ballads. You're aware of that. You know about the romantic eye, the insistence upon the individuality of the poet, of the persona who is writing the poet. You are aware of the importance of nature, the theme of return to nature that all the romantics were dealing with. And in the work of the younger romantics, you will also perhaps be aware of, the recurrent themes of rebellion, of, struggling against dead and old and corrupt social practices, যেগুলো humanity-কে, human society-কে, human civilization-কে যেগুলো bow down করে, যেগুলো chain down করে, as Blake would very famously in his poem London Call refer to as the mind-forged manacles. Manacle meaning chain, তাই তো? আর মাইন্ড ফর্জড মানে, ফর্জ কথাটার মানে হচ্ছে তৈরি করা। সুতরাং যে চেনগুলো আমাদেরকে বেঁধে রেখেছে, কিন্তু যেগুলো লিটারাল চেইনস নয়, যেগুলো ফিজিক্যাল চেইনস নয়, যেগুলো আমাদের মাইন্ডে রয়েছে, দোজ আর দ্য চেইনস দ্যাট ব্লেক ওয়াজ রেফারিং টু। And in a poem like West Wind, which many of you have already done, you are aware of, you're familiar with, you remember how, Shelley talks about, how he was untamed. He was untamed and untamable when he was young. And that, however, has been changed by a heavy weight of hours that he says has chained him down. So again, referring to the Blakean concept of the mind-forged manacles, right? So they were trying to struggle against this. Now, after, so the romantic period, if we were to look at it chronologically, যদি আমরা সময়ের ইয়েতে দেখি, তাহলে roughly এটাকে আমরা ফেলতে পারি from 1798, when the lyrical ballads was published by Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William Wordsworth, a joint publication, যেখানে ওনারা romantic ideology-টাকে put forth করলেন, till roughly 1824, right, when Lord Byron passed away. So এই যে পিরিয়ডটা, এর মধ্যে আমরা মোটামুটি পুরো রোমান্টিক রাইটিংস গুলোকে পাচ্ছি। Now, for a movement so prolific, for a movement so intense, for a movement so important, obviously, it does not get over with the death of Byron. It does not get over with the death of the younger romantics. Of course, remember that Coleridge, Wordsworth, the older ones are still alive. But somehow the rebelliousness that had come to be attached with the later romantics, the younger ones, that sort of died out. It started petering out. And Wordsworth, as Browning would go on to say later on, Wordsworth kind of apologized for the, should I say, the iconoclasm of his youth, for the rebellion, for the propensity towards rebellion that he had shown in his youth, but he gradually gave all that up. He mellowed down with age. উনি শান্ত হয়ে গেলেন, উনি ওনার এই rebellious thoughts গুলোকে ছেড়ে দেন. Of course, he was never as rebellious as a Shelley or a Byron, but nevertheless, whatever thoughts of non-affiliation he had propounded, সেগুলোকে কিন্তু উনি ছেড়ে দিতে থাকলেন. So Browning and the late and the generation of the Victorian writers যারা succeed করলো, যারা এলো after these romantic poets, they were to an extent disappointed, and therefore for writers like Tennyson, poets like Browning, যাদেরকে আমরা অল্প হলেও ডিটেইলে চেষ্টা করব যতটা পসিবল আজকে এইটুকু টাইমের মধ্যে ডিসকাস করার, তারা কিন্তু disappointed হচ্ছেন with people like Wordsworth, also because Wordsworth went on, if you will remember, to become the poet laureate of England. And to become the poet laureate, which is the official poet of the kingdom, of the monarchy, you would have to talk in a language যেটা অফিসিয়াল ন্যারেটিভটাকে সাপোর্ট করবে, তাই তো? তাহলে আমি যদি রাজার যদি অফিসিয়াল পোয়েট হই তাহলে আমি রাজার এগেনস্টে কথা বলতে পারি না। I will essentially have to talk in terms and in the tone and in a language that will align itself as well with the official narrative. And this was something that was found to be quite disappointing by the younger generation of the Victorian poets, chief among them Tennyson and Browning. So, keeping that in mind, the year 1850, 1850, becomes very important. This is a date. If any of you are taking down notes, or if any of you are trying to at least remember, তাহলে আমি যে কটা ডেট হয়তো এখনো অবধি বললাম যদি আমি আরেকবার রিভাইজ করে দিই তোমাদেরকে, তাহলে 1798 number 1 is a very important date. কেন বললাম? It marked the official beginning of the Romantic period with the publication of lyrical ballads by Wordsworth and Coleridge, followed by 1824, right, which I said again kind of officially brought the Romantic movement to an end with the death of Lord Byron, who was the last to die amongst the younger Romantics, Shelley, Keats and Byron. Okay. Followed by the year 1850, 1850, যখন Wordsworth died. Okay. And with the death of Wordsworth as the poet laureate of England, the Romantic period, now officially, unofficially, in whatever way imaginable, it now really does come to an end. And 1850 te Wordsworth ke succeed korlo as poet laureate of England Alfred Lord Tennyson. So now Tennyson becomes a new poet laureate, and obviously he's becoming the poet laureate মানে উনি অলরেডি অনেক কিছু পাবলিশ করে ফেলেছেন তার আগে, এবং টেনিসনের অনেক কিছু পোয়েট্রি পাবলিশ হয়ে গেছে মানে already at this point of time 1850 the Victorian period has already reached its high water mark. There are important publications that are happening before this, there are important publications that are happening after this, but 1850 is something that we are going to use as a reference to keep in mind because we are looking at a long period, so there are important dates. Victorian period টাকে যদি আমরা একটা ব্র্যাকেটের মধ্যে আনার চেষ্টা করি তাহলে the dates would be 1837 to 1901, right? Why? Because 1837 marked the year of the ascension of Queen Victoria to the British throne after the death of her uncle. তাহলে 1837 উনি রানী হলেন এবং দীর্ঘ 63 বছর অলমোস্ট উনি রুল করলেন, which was one of the longest terms that any king or queen in England had served in official position, and she died in the year 1901. Now we will remember, since we are all in West Bengal, we will remember that the Victoria Memorial was also established to commemorate this long reign that she had successfully fulfilled all the responsibilities that she had fulfilled. But of course we need not talk in glorified terms about her reign, given that this was also a period that marked a really low time for us Indians and for other colonized nations all over the world, given that we were facing the brunt of the colonial rule that made them so prosperous, that made them so successful, that gave them cause to celebrate. So we were the ones who were literally and metaphorically paying the cost for their celebrations, as the people of England are still paying for the cost of the coronation of their recent king. Now, so that is another date range that we have just looked at, 1837 to 1901. I hope that you will remember this as well. Okay, so far এতটা অবধি যে ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ডের একদম ছোট্ট করে আমি যে ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ডটা বললাম, so far any question, any clarification required, anything that anybody has any confusion about? I have not said anything much, I know. Clear? So can I move on from here? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, right. Thank you. So I will try. Just give me 1 second. I will try to start my presentation. Since I cannot see my screen anymore, do tell me if this is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And since I'm looking at my own presentation, আমি তো এখন স্ক্রিনটা দেখতে পাবো না, সো কেউ যদি কোনো কমেন্ট করো একটু আনমিউট করে বলো, otherwise I will not be able to look at it. Okay, so we are looking at a brief introduction to Victorian poetry. The major poets that I intend to cover, of course I cannot cover all, I cannot claim to cover all, but I would at least hope that it would give you a pointer as to which direction to follow. Who are some of the major poets writing during this period? Okay, so we have Alfred Lord Tennyson, we have Robert Browning, we have Matthew Arnold, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Christina Rossetti, Charles Algernon Swinburne, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, chief among whom I will talk about Dante Gabriel Rossetti. We have Emily Bronte, we have Thomas Hardy, and Rudyard Kipling. Right. So I have a few pointers here again as to what this period is supposed to cover. So the Victorian period, obviously, as we were discussing, derives its name from the long reign of Queen Victoria, the then reigning monarch, who ruled from 1837 to 1901. Okay. Now, this was a period of great political reforms, right? So there were lots of laws happening, taking place, being passed, that were trying to improve, from education to the property rights to the farm laws. All of these were being changed in order to.
Yes. Ma'am, আপনি কি কোনো প্রেজেন্টেশন শো করছেন? আসলে স্ক্রিনটা দেখতে পাচ্ছি কিন্তু কোনো প্রেজেন্টেশনটা দেখতে পাচ্ছি না।
Is that so?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, only your black screen is visible.
Okay, just a second.
না ম্যাম, তবে এটা তো দেখা যাচ্ছে আমার স্ক্রিন। No, ma'am, the presentation is not visible. Only your Google Meet screen is coming on our screen.
Same. কেউ দেখতে পাচ্ছ? মানে this is common to all. This is happening to everybody.
Yes, ma'am. দেখতে পাচ্ছি না।
Okay. Okay, so maybe I can try to stop presenting that and start again. Let me see if that can help. Wait. Yes, but let me see again. Is any PPT visible now?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
No, ma'am. Same দেখাচ্ছে।
I have no clue why this is happening. Arindam, are you still there?
Yes. It's absolutely visible. What you can do, you can
See
minimize.
my PPT, Arindam?
No. I'm not able to see right now the PPT. You have to minimize this. Minimize the screen. Yes, and open the PPT now.
That is open actually. That is how I was showing for so long. But is it visible now? I have minimized that.
No, it's now not visible. Okay.
Can I do something, Arindam? Can I share it with you and maybe you can?
Yeah. I can show it, but I'm just giving you some advice. তুমি একটা কাজ করো, তুমি stop presenting করো। তুমি stop presenting করো। আচ্ছা। এরপরে তুমি present screen এ যাও।
Okay.
Here you select the entire screen. Okay. And select the entire window. Select the দেখো তোমার কম্পিউটার স্ক্রিনে আসছে share your entire screen. ওই স্ক্রিনটাকে পুরোটা সিলেক্ট করো, করে শেয়ার করো। দাঁড়াও, এক সেকেন্ড, আমি ভুল করে প্রেজেন্ট করে ফেলেছি। হ্যাঁ, রাইট নাও now, please go to the PowerPoint. Yes, it is visible now. It is visible now, and go to the slide, present slide mode.
Right, right,
slide,
right.
Yes.
So it is visible to everyone now, I hope.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Arindam, for guiding me. Thank you so much. Okay, now, so I will reread that slide again, or maybe you can read it yourself. So this was the first slide that I was reading through all the poets that I intend to discuss. Okay, so there's Alfred Lord Tennyson, Robert Browning, Matthew Arnold, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Christina Rossetti, Algernon Charles Swinburne, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, Emily Bronte, Thomas Hardy, and Rudyard Kipling. Okay, so as I was saying that this period therefore derives its name from the reign of Queen Victoria from 1837 to 1901. It was a period of great political reforms. As I already pointed out, this was a period of great changes happening, social, political changes happening for all the subjects of the kingdom. And they were getting educational reforms, and the farm laws, everything was changing. The property laws were changing, the voting rights were changing. So all of these were being reflected in the period. And this is also the age of industrialization, as more and more industries and factories were set up, as why? And of course it would, because of as I've stated right beside that, it was the heyday of colonialism. সুতরাং যত ওরা ওদের explorers derke পাঠাচ্ছে, ওদের administrators derke পাঠাচ্ছে, ওদের governors derke পাঠাচ্ছে, so they were gradually increasing their colonial project. They were absolutely into their colonial project, and they had already more than they had already colonized more than half of the globe. And as it has been pointed out, theirs was called the empire on which the sun never set. সেটা তোমরা অনেকেই হয়তো জানো, যে again metaphorically, because literally if the sun set on one half of the world, the other half was witnessing sunrise, and everywhere across the world they had their own colonies. So the more the colonialism increased, that the colonized land, the number of the colonized lands increased, the more the materials that were coming in, আমাদেরকে সব রকম ভাবে তারা শোষণ করছিল, এবং এই যে তারা খুবই কম expensive, all the raw materials, and all the stuff that they were getting, and exporting successfully to their tiny island nation, tiny island kingdom. Obviously the factories were put up, and it was an unprecedented time of prosperity, economic, financial prosperity for them. But again, when I say that, we have to keep in mind যেটা সবার জন্য নয়, কখনোই কোনো কিছুই সবার জন্য হয় না. So those of you who are from the 6th semester, যারা হয়তো মার্কসিস্ট থিওরি করেছো, তারা জানবে যে always it is the rich who keep getting richer, who get the most out of any of these prosperity, while there was of course মানে যখন আমরা বলছি তারা as a kingdom, as a land, as a nation তারা prosperous হচ্ছে, সেটার মানে কিন্তু এটা কখনোই নয় that 100% of the population is becoming prosperous. একেবারেই নয়. They had their own slums, they had their own proletariat, they had their own have-nots, and there was in fact a very stark contrast between tara jader chilo the haves, as Marx would call, and those that did not have, who were the have-nots. So some who had become rich beyond imagination, and there were others, a great majority of the people jara ei factories e kaj korche, jara ei industries guloke রেখেছে, বাঁচিয়ে রেখেছে as it were, but who were living in slums without the basic sanitary conditions, without education, without water, without food. So they were struggling, and they were struggling terribly, no better than many of the colonized nations were in the condition that we were in. Okay, but taking all of that together, again it was a period of great conflict. This is also the period that is known for high moral standards and prudery. And কেন এত মোরালিটি নিয়ে তারা কথা বলছে, কেন তারা এত prudery দেখাচ্ছে, এটার একটা বড় কারণ আমরা দেখতে পারবো in the second last point that I have mentioned, which was that it was the age of conflict between religious faith and science. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is many of you are aware, I'm sure, যেহেতু তোমরা Victorian period পড়ে এসেছো, যে this was the age of three of the greatest thinkers, যারা ওয়েস্টার্ন ওয়ার্ল্ড কে শুধু নয়, গোটা পৃথিবীকে চেঞ্জ করে রেখেছে, right? Who were these three? You would know. There was Karl Marx. He came up with the theory of communism, and I must name Friedrich Engels with him. There was Sigmund Freud, who talked about the mind for the first time. He studied and analyzed, dissected the human mind, as it were, like no man before him had done. And it was also the period of Charles Darwin, who came up with that very famous, or should I say infamous, the theory of evolution, the origin of species, right? So all of these thinkers brought a change to Victorian society, to the Victorian mind, if I can take it as one whole, as one organic structure. এমন একটা চেঞ্জ নিয়ে এলো যেটাকে তার আগে কখনো কেউ ভাবতে পারেনি। So while Carl, if we look at it from the more microcosmic level to the more macrocosmic level, তাহলে সব থেকে হয়তো innermost level we have to talk about Sigmund Freud, যিনি human mind টাকে এমন ভাবে analyze করলেন, which showed the structures of the human mind, the id, the ego, the superego, the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious, যেগুলো নিয়ে আগে কেউ কখনো ভাবতে পারেনি। And he essentially changed and challenged the way in which we think, in the way in which we evolve as humans psychologically, right? তাহলে সব থেকে মানুষের মনটাকে স্টাডি করলেন সিগমন্ড ফ্রয়েড। এরপরে মানুষ কোথায় থাকে না, সোসাইটিতে থাকে। এই সোসাইটিটা কোন রুলস ফলো করে, what are the principles that govern the change, the evolution of this human society, what are the economic factors, what are the non-economic other factors, all of these was being studied by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in the Communist Manifesto. তাহলে আমরা মানুষকে দেখলাম, মানুষের মাথা দেখলাম, তারপরে মানুষের মাথার একটু বাইরে গিয়ে হিউম্যান সোসাইটিটা দেখলাম, where human beings are all living together. And finally, if you think of the whole world, where not only human beings but all forms of life are cohabiting, are coexisting, this world, this natural world, এইটার ব্যাপারেও কিন্তু চ্যালেঞ্জ করলেন Charles Darwin in The Origin of Species. And why is this book very important, and why was Darwin banned in a manner that not even Karl Marx or not even Sigmund Freud would be banned, or why did people become so wary of him? Because উনি যখন theory of natural selection দেখাচ্ছেন, যখন উনি evolutionের কথা বলছেন, যখন উনি বলছেন that we were not created in the perfect human form by some benevolent Christian God, the Jehovah of the Old Testament, the Yahweh as he is named, but rather যে উনি আমাদেরকে সুন্দর করে গড়ে দেননি, but rather we are descendants of apes and monkeys. Now this was something that was a great blow, if not the greatest blow, to the religious, to the Christian sensibilities that the Western world thrived on, right? And therefore এই যে চ্যালেঞ্জটা উনি থ্রো করলেন, এবং শুধু তো থ্রো করলেন না, কেন ওনাকে কেউ ফেলে দিতে পারলো না, ওনার কথাগুলো ফেলে দিতে পারলো না এই কারণে, because he was a greatly learned man, he was a scholar, and there was no question in the then Victorian society regarding his scholarly reputation, regarding his academic accomplishments. And what he said, he proved a lifetime that he had spent gathering evidence of what theory he was propagating, that he was putting forth, and he actually put forth the examples, the evidences of it, which is why the Victorian population suddenly found itself. And it was also the period when the science, the scientific society was evolving, and Lord Newton is coming up with his theories of gravity and so on and so forth. So what is happening fundamentally is that not only is science and technology progressing exponentially, but also the religious fundamental core, if I may use the word CORE, core, the fundamentals, যে ভিতটা যেটার উপরে দাঁড়িয়ে ছিল ভিক্টোরিয়ান সোসাইটি, সেইটাকে চ্যালেঞ্জ করা হলো, সেইটাকে উইকেন করে দেওয়া হলো by the works of these thinkers and scientists and workers. Right. So this leads to the great conflict that is at the heart of most Victorian poetry that we will be looking at. Keno, we must ask ourselves, আমাদের সময় থাকবে না হয়তো অত ভীষণ পোয়েট্রি গুলো লাইন বাই লাইন দেখার অ্যানালাইজ করার, but I will try to give you this idea, that when a Lord Tennyson or when a Browning especially talks about the aberrant mentalities, abnormal mentalities, the mentalities of criminals and psychopaths and murderers and thieves, যখন এদের কথা বলছে কেন বলছেন, why this morbid obsession with these kinds of aberrant mentalities, as it were, the marginalized mentalities যেগুলো সেন্টারে অ্যালাউ করা হয় না কখনো, রাইট? কেন অ্যালফ্রেড লর্ড টেনিসন, একজন খুব ফেমাস WJ ফক্স বলে একজন রিভিউয়ার, উনি একটা খবরের কাগজে রিভিউ করেছিলেন টেনিসনের ওয়ার্ককে, and if I may read out just 1 second, he says, 1 minute. Yes, it's a very, very nice line. He says in the Westminster Review, 1831 WJ Fox bolchen about Tennyson's poetry, he climbs the pineal gland, which is a part of the brain. He climbs the pineal gland as if it were a hill, at a mountain chorar moto, thik jerokom Wordsworth solitary reaper একটা মাউন্টেন চড়তে চড়তে সলিটারি রিপোর্টের গানটা শুনছে এবং দাঁড়িয়ে শুনছে তার গান, and ভাষাটা বুঝতে পারছে না, the Scottish dialect that she's singing in, কিন্তু nevertheless he's very impressed, he's deeply touched by her song, and then when he's done, he moves on and he says, the music in my heart I bore long after it was heard no more. So just as he climbs up that hill, listens to that song, and then climbs back down and then goes away, similarly Tennyson here is climbing hills, but as WJ Fox says, he's climbing the hills of the human mind, the heights and the depths of the human mind. He's trying to measure them as Browning would do, simultaneously, contemporaneously, if I say. Right. So why this obsession with the human mind? Because people like Sigmund Freud were already coming up with the whole discourse of psychoanalysis. Right. Tennyson would go on. Amra ekkhoni dekhbo in his poem, Ulysses, in his poem, The Lotus Eaters, especially. He would talk about the terrible living conditions of the working class people, the proletariat. He was aware of them, even though he was the poet laureate. He was absolutely aware of their terrible living conditions. He knew the ennui, that characterized their life, and he was talking about the tremendous frustration that characterized their lives. তাহলে এইটার কথাগুলো উনি যখন বলছেন, এখানে কি আমরা একটা মার্কসিস্ট একটা ফিলিং কি পাচ্ছি না, যেখানে হি ইজ অলসো বিকামিং অ্যাওয়্যার অ্যান্ড টকিং অ্যাবাউট ইট ইন লিটারেচার, ইন অ্যান্ড থ্রু পোয়েট্রি, অ্যাবাউট দ্য কন্ডিশনস, দ্য রিপ্রেসিভ কন্ডিশনস অফ দ্য প্রোলেটারিয়েট, right? And if we talk about Matthew Arnold, Dover Beach, which we will, these are some of the seminal poems that I will discuss a little bit in detail. There we will see how this crisis of faith that had been brought about, of Christian faith that had been brought about, and not just Christian faith, faith overall, faith in humanity, faith in each other, faith in traditional institutions like marriage and love, and all of these had been severely questioned. It had been severely shaken, and these were all being recorded. These were all being reflected in the words of Matthew Arnold in Dover Beach, where he would say, that the world which is in front of us, it might look deceptively beautiful on the surface, but if you were to scratch that surface and look beyond that surface, you would find ugliness, the grotesque. You see, because romantic poetry mostly was concerned with the beautiful and the sublime. They were concerned with the aesthetics of beauty, jeta manushke sundor feel korabe, aesthetically beautiful. They were concerned with that. Even if they were looking at the idiot boy, when Wordsworth was looking at the idiot boy, যখন Wordsworth leech gatherer কথা বলছেন, যার কথা বলুক, মাইকেলের কথা বলছে, যার কথা বলছে, যেখানেই বলছে, everywhere they seem to be able to find beauty. Not so with the Victorian poets, no. They insisted upon looking not only at that which was beautiful, but sometimes at the cost of the beautiful, they said it was important to look at the grotesque, to look at the ugly, because that, the good and the bad, together formed life. You could not have one without the other, and you could not definitely preach an aesthetics of beauty at the cost of the ugliness that people were facing in their lives, brought about, like I said, by economic disparity between the rich and the poor, brought about by other differences of rights between the men and the women, which was still there, even though সেগুলোকে একটু একটু হলেও ব্রিজ করতে আরম্ভ করেছিল। তোমরা জেন এর পড়েছো এখানে অনেকে, you would know how in Jane Eyre, you have a heroine who is, who is talking about female emancipation. She is someone who has found, who might not have money, who might not have beauty, who might not have family, but at least what she does have is accomplishments, personal accomplishments. She has education. She's someone who has a sense of integrity. She is someone who has a very deep-seated sense of independence and self-reliance, autonomy, right? So yes, they were no longer as bad in a condition as they were in the preceding centuries. But when literally prostitution and death were some of the options that were open for women who did not get married, or whom who were not left behind a lot of money or property by their families. So now they had more prospects, that is true, but it does not mean that it took away all of the gap, or it bridged the gap between the poor and the rich, or that it bridged the gap between the male and the female, between the genders. No, that was still there. All right. So having said that, we by the time we reach the end, so this consciousness of this economic disparity, of the gender disparity, of a loss of the traditional values, of the loss of faith, all of these sort of got together and catapulted them to what would in the next century be referred to as modernism, right? Where you have, I think, again, many of you are aware of the poetry of T.S. Eliot, even if I were to not name any other person, since we are talking about poetry here. So you would know the kind of aesthetics, the modern, aesthetics that T.S. Eliot would be bringing, when he talks about this ugly, when he talks about the smoke and the fog and the smog, and he talks about the fragmentation of the self, the fingers and the eyes and the feet, that are all, it seems, fragmented, they are disintegrated from the whole being of, the human figure, right? So from the romantic quest, of beauty for beauty, to the fragmentation of the self that T.S. Eliot talks about, in between these two extremes, we have the Victorian period, where we are literally on the threshold of leaving behind that quest for beauty and moving towards the fragmentation and the dissociation and the alienation that the modern age would be characterized by. Okay, so we are in the threshold of it. Before I move on, অনেক কিছু বলে ফেললাম। again, আমি শুধু আমার স্ক্রিনটা দেখতে পাচ্ছি, তোমাদেরকে দেখতে পাচ্ছি না। somebody or a few of you, please unmute and tell me if it is making sense or not, if at all you can make sense of what I'm saying.
তোমরা feedback দিতে পারো মানে?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Any questions so far? I am guessing no from the silence.
No, ma'am.
No, still not.
Not right now. Okay. বাকিগুলো ছেড়ে দাও। একমাত্র যেটা কনফ্লিক্ট বিটুইন সায়েন্স এন্ড ফেথ যেটা বললাম, এটা ক্লিয়ার সবার কাছে? কেন হলো?
Yes.
Okay, because this is going to be very important. This is going to be a stepping stone for some of the next few poems that we're going to look at. Okay, right. So continuing on, Queen Victoria from 1819 to 1901 in her, coronation robes, followed by, one of the surviving photographs of the Queen. You can see her bejeweled in jewels that were not theirs, mostly ours. Okay, and from different parts of the globe. So the first poet we will look at quickly, I think I've already, done with 1 hour. So Alfred Lord Tennyson from 1809 to 1892. I have not put much. আমি আরেকটা কথা তোমাদেরকে বলি, I would hope যে তোমাদের সবার কাছে হয়তো extra একটা phone বা কিছু হয়তো থাকতে পারে যেখানে if I refer to a few poems, maybe you can look at them yourselves, because I did not get the time to incorporate all of the poems into my PPT. So maybe you will be able to look at it from your own phones and follow me when I discuss them a little bit. Okay, so now some of the most famous poems by Tennyson include The Lady of Shalott. This is a poem that many of you are very well aware of, given that you have read it in your syllabus, which is why that is not the poem that I'm going to talk about. I am going to talk about a little bit about the Lotus Eaters and Ulysses. Okay. So in Lotus Eaters, let me try something. Wait. Am I visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I
Yes,
will
ma'am.
see if I can. Okay, can you see the poem that I'm trying to sort of open
Yes,
the
ma'am.
window?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah?
Yes, ma'am.
Right, good. So that should kind of help you. Now this poem is one of the most celebrated, one of the most famous poems by Tennyson, and it is famous, okay, because in this poem he is like in Ulysses, another very famous poem by Tennyson. He reuses myth. Now, many of you are aware of the name Ulysses. Even if you're not familiar with the poem, you are familiar with the name. Why? Because you have done Iliad in your second sem. You know how Ulysses was a mythological figure who figured very prominent, and it was he who was considered very, very intelligent. He came up with the idea of the Trojan horse, and that sort of changed the entire course of the war happening in Troy, and that finally led to them winning. Finally, Agamemnon and Menelaus taking away Helen. So he uses this myth, a very famous myth, and restructures them, retells them, as it were, to suit the needs of the Victorian period, to communicate what was incommunicable then, especially from the vantage point, from the perspective of the proletariat, the workers. So what is happening in this poem is that Ulysses is returning with his ship full of his crew members. They're all sailing back to Ithaca, the island kingdom that Ulysses was king of. They're all going back, and while they are going, they're all tired, understandably tired from rowing the boat for so long. And when they come across this Lotus Island, they get down and they look everywhere. They're exploring this land. Now, the moment I say they get down on an island and they're exploring the island, it should possibly bring into your mind the notion of colonialism, because that is what many others were doing. The explorers and the discoverers were doing exactly that. They were taking their ships, as far as to Asia and Africa and America, and they were coming across these new lands new for them, although we were so much more ancient than they were. And they were calling us new, and they were, discovering our languages, discovering our cultures, discovering, us, as it were. And here, similarly, the people, they get down. They're looking everywhere. They're looking at the land. Okay, courage, he said, pointed towards the land. They're thinking of going back home, but once they land in this island, what does it look like? In the afternoon, they came unto a land in which it always seemed afternoon. It is pleasant. The island is pleasant. It is very lazy. It is comfortable. ঠিক যেরকম দুপুরবেলা খেয়ে দিয়ে বেশ একটা ঘুম দিতে ভালো লাগে. That is the kind of, sensibility we are looking at. Why? All around the coast, the languid air did swoon. Languish kora. Lazy feel kora. Okay. Breathing like one that had a weary dream. You felt like it was not real. যেটা বললাম ওই ভাত খেয়ে ঘুম যেরকম লাগে একটা বেশ খুব লেজি শান্তির ঘুম সেরকম তাদেরও নেমে মনে হচ্ছে বেশ একটা সুন্দর ল্যান্ডে এলাম যেখানে it is always afternoon, as if the sun is always just about to set. It will be twilight. It is peaceful. You are not in a hurry. It is not very loud. It is very peaceful. Okay. So they are first exploring that island. But the part that I want you to look at is this part, where it says, while they're exploring this land, suddenly now, they are coming across the inhabitants of the island. And who are they? They are the mild-eyed, melancholy lotus eaters. Now, if you mark the spelling of the word lotus here, আমরা spell করি LOTUS. এখানে লেখা আছে LOTOS. এটা কি টেনিসন ভুল করেছেন spelling? একদমই না. Consciously করেছেন. He is not referring to the lotus flower, which is our national flower. No. He is referring to some other mythical kind of a flower, which here will present an anesthesia, as it were, to these people. এমন একটা খাবার এই লোটাসটা, the lotus eaters নামেই রয়েছে, এই ফুলটা এরা যখন খাবে এদের মনে হবে আর তাদের খিদে পাচ্ছে না, আর তাদের ঘুম পাচ্ছে না, আর তাদের কাজ করতে ইচ্ছা করছে না, আর তাদের এই আইল্যান্ড ছেড়ে আবার জাহাজে উঠে আবার খেটে জাহাজটাকে চালিয়ে নিয়ে বাড়ি যেতে ইচ্ছা করবে না.
Kind of laziness.
Yes, tell me.
Kind of laziness.
Yes, absolutely. Kind of laziness. Absolutely correct. But why? I think that is the question we must ask. Keno tara jete chaiche. Now let us read. He will tell us why. So the people are coming, the inhabitants of the island, tara welcome korte esheche all these people who have gotten down from that ship. Branches they bore of that enchanted stem, laden with flower and fruit, whereof they gave to each. সবাইকে খেতে দিচ্ছে. But whoso did receive of them, যারা নিচ্ছে এই ফুলগুলো নিয়ে খাচ্ছে, what is happening to them? And taste to him the gushing of the wave, far, far away did seem to mourn and rave on alien shores. And if his fellows spake, যদি তার বন্ধুরা তার সাথে কথা বলে, his voice was thin as voices from the grave, and deep asleep he seemed, yet all awake, and music in his ears his beating heart did make. মনে হচ্ছে যেন as if ওইটা খেয়ে নিলে, লোটাস ওই এনচ্যান্টেড স্টেমটা খেয়ে নিলে এমন একটা জেগে থাকা অবস্থায় ঘুমিয়ে পড়ছে যেন as if তারা সবকিছুর থেকে ডিসএনগেজড হয়ে যাচ্ছে, ডিট্যাচড হয়ে যাচ্ছে. যেটা বললাম, খিদে পাবে না, ঘুম পাবে না, কাজ করতে ইচ্ছা করবে না, বাড়ি যেতেও ইচ্ছা করবে না. But why this feeling, and why are more and more of these sailors, mariners trying to eat more of this fruit? কেন তারা বাড়ি যেতে চাইছে না এত দীর্ঘ যুদ্ধের পরে? Why? Because, as Tennyson would state, these are the proletariat, these are the workers. এরা জাহাজ চালাচ্ছে, তাদেরকেই খাটতে হচ্ছে. The physical labor is theirs. Ulysses himself will command. Ulysses himself might even sail for a while, but he will not sail for a prolonged time like these mariners. এদেরকে অর্ডার করা হয়, এরা অর্ডার ফলো করে, এদের নিজেদের কোনো মতামত নেই. They do not have their own opinion. They do not have their own voice. They do not have their own say. They are not entitled to their own actions. They must only obey. They must only do what their superiors, their social superiors tell them to do. And এটা কি শুধু মিথিক্যাল সেলার্সদের হচ্ছে না? টেনিসন বলছেন, this is the condition of the proletariat in Victorian England. তারা tired, the factory workers, the farmers, the laborers, those who work for the wages. Remember, the chimney sweeper in Blake's poem. the little child, the little children like Tom and Dick and Harry, যাদের নাম আমরা দেখেছিলাম, they are tired from working too much. They are overworked, they're underfed, they are without rest, they are without any reprise, they are simply tired. Even death seems a better alternative than to live on like this. This is the reason why these people want to eat more and more of these fruit and not go back home. কি বলছে দেখো লাইনগুলো, they sat them down upon the yellow sand. সবাই খাচ্ছে নেশা করার মতো, যেন আসিফ নেশা করে বসে যাচ্ছে। They are sitting down on the yellow sand between the sun and the moon upon the shore, and sweet it was to dream of fatherland. The moment he says fatherland, we are reminded not only of Ithaca, the kingdom to where these mariners are sailing, but also of England, which was the fatherland of all the colonizers, of child and wife and slave. But evermore most weary seemed the sea, weary the oar, weary the wandering fields of barren foam. আর ওই বিশাল সমুদ্রকে সেল করে যেতে তাদের ইচ্ছা করছে না। Then someone said, we will return no more, and all at once they sang, our island home, which is Ithaca, is far beyond the wave, we will no longer roam. আর যাব না, থাকুক বাড়ি পড়ে, থাকুক চাইল্ড, থাকুক ওয়াইফ, থাকুক স্লেভ পড়ে, আর ফিরে যাব না। সবার জন্য করেছি, অনেক করেছি, এবার নিজের জন্য থাকবো, এই আইল্যান্ডেই বসে থাকবো, আর কিচ্ছু করবো না, কোথাও যাব না, কারো কথা শুনবো না, রাইট? So the next few stanzas, I'm not reading them because we are short of time, but you must try and read them someday because they are beautiful lines. You know, Tennyson was known for his lyricism, right? These are, when he says there is sweet music here that softer falls than petals from blown roses on the grass, or night dews on still waters between walls of shadowy granite in a gleaming past. Beautiful music that gentlier on the spirit lies than tired eyelids upon tired eyes. ঘুম এলে টায়ার্ড চোখের পাতা যেভাবে ইজিলি বন্ধ হয়ে যায়, তার থেকেও ইজিলি একটা মিউজিক যেন ফ্লোট করে বেড়াচ্ছে চারিদিকে এই লোটাস আইল্যান্ডে, and it seems like a lullaby that seems to put them to sleep. মনে হচ্ছে খাই আর খেয়ে ঘুমিয়ে পড়ি, আর উঠবো না, আর কিচ্ছু করবো না। This is Tennyson at his best. This is Tennyson writing beautifully and lyrically. Pity that we do not have time to go through all of these, okay? But look at this. He says, this is a choric song, so all the sailors are singing this together, and they says, and they say, sorry, why are we weighed upon with heaviness and utterly consumed with sharp distress? Remember, ওরা ওদের লাইফের কন্ডিশনটাকে এক্সপ্লেন করছে, and look at the words they are using. Heaviness, utterly consumed with sharp distress, while all things else have rest from weariness. Heaviness, distress, weariness, সবাই রেস্ট করে। পাখিরা সারাদিন খাওয়ার খুঁজে বেড়ায়, দিনের শেষে they will go back and rest. The animals too will go back, have their fill, they will eat their food, they will go sleep. সবকিছু দিনের শেষে রেস্ট করে। All things have rest, why should we toil alone? We only toil who are the first of things. আমরা শুধু কারা, আমরা বলতে কারা? আজকে ডার্সি ইন প্রাইড এন্ড প্রেজুডিস বা মিস্টার বিংলে, তারা টয়েল করে, তারা কাজ করে? অফকোর্স তারা করে না, কারণ তাদের জন্য অন্যরা কাজ করে, and they live off the profits of these people. And yet these workers, these laborers, these wage earners, these farmers, তারা সারাদিন খেটেও দিনের শেষে তাদের বাড়িতে খাওয়ার জোটে না। এখানে না বলে পারছি না, my students will know. I keep telling them all the time, many of you, if you're doing Marxism, I can see Samuel, Samuel's icon here, he will know, হীরক রাজার দেশে সত্যজিৎ রায়ের সেই আইকনিক মুভি, যেখানে সেই বিখ্যাত গান কতই রঙ্গ দেখি দুনিয়ায়, and the singer sings, সোনার ফসল ফলায় যে তার দুই বেলা জোটে না আহার, হীরার খনির মজুর হয়ে কানাকুড়ি নাই। This is the condition of the proletariat all over the world. It didn't matter if you were a proletariat, in the colonized nation or in the nation of the colonizer. Your condition was still the same. You were still working 24/7. You were still working relentlessly, and there still was never enough food. There never was enough money, and there never was rest. This is something that they have realized, and therefore they question, why should we toil alone? আমরা কেন একা খাটবো, কেন খেটেই যাব, তার কোনো শান্তি নেই, তার থেকে কোনো নিস্তার নেই, তার থেকে কোনো রেস্ট নেই। We who are the first of things, বাইবেলে না বলা আছে that humanity, mankind is the highest of all God's creations, highest of all of God's creation. তাহলে সবার রেস্ট আছে, যারা আমাদের থেকে নিচে তাদের রেস্ট আছে, অ্যানিমালস দের, বার্ডস দের, ইনসেক্টস দের, আমাদের কেন নেই? Why? Because এরা তো গডের অর্ডারে পড়ে না, এরা তো ম্যান মেড অর্ডারে পড়ে, the bourgeois and the proletariat, the haves and the have-nots. God might be merciful to them. God might be merciful to his creation, her creation, whatever God you believe in. But human beings are the most inhuman of all. They do not have pity. They do not have, kindness to give to others. Therefore, they're questioning their positionality. They are questioning where they really stand. Okay. We who are the last line, why should we only toil? The roof and the crown of things, even, allied with Darwin's idea of evolution, যে ডারউইনও তো তাই বলছে, অন্যভাবে বলছে, অন্য লাইন দিয়ে এসে বলছে, বাট তাহলেও তো বলছে যে আমরাই তো হাইয়েস্ট ইভলভ করেছি, করে না আজকে আমরা হোমোসেপিয়েন্স হয়েছি। তাহলেও তো যদি আমরা বাইবেলের দিক দিয়ে, বিবলিক্যাল রিলিজিয়াস দিক দিয়ে দেখি, তাহলেও গড আমাদেরকে হাইয়েস্ট ক্রিয়েশন হিসেবে বানিয়েছে। যদি আমরা এভলিউশনারি থিওরি দিয়ে দেখি, তাহলেও তো আমরা ইভলভ করেছি, and we are at the height of our evolution. Why then should we be subject to the unfairness of this society? The answer is in the question itself, because it is human society, because it is built by people who do not care about exploitation, who do not care about repression. So you see how Marx was therefore forced to write the Communist Manifesto. Kintu shobai Karl Marx na hote pare. Kintu even poets like Tennyson, who eventually became the poet laureate, tarao feel korche the injustice of the system to which they were all subject. Injustice ta feel korte parche, kintu transcend korte parche na. Okay? So this is a very famous poem. Now the next poem, very quickly, we will look at is Ulysses, again by Tennyson. Now this again, you see, it is continuing with the same, Ulysses myth, but ebar perspective to change hoye geche. Ebar ar proletariat der perspective na, ebar the perspective of the king himself, Ulysses, the ruler, the famous hero of myth. He has returned to Ithaca. He has, ruled in Ithaca with his wife and his son, his wife Penelope, his son Telemachus. He has ruled for long, but now he is tired. He is a king, but more than a king, he claims to be an explorer. He claims to be a discoverer. Again, the spirit of colonialism, voice hocche ekhane. And he says, I am now an old king, I have an old wife, I have a young son, I have an island kingdom where the people are not very cultured, they're not very civilized. They are a rude people. Rude meaning uncultured, uncivilized, not as sophisticated. And he says, বহু বছর রুল করেছি, আর ভালো লাগছে না। এইবার I want to go back to the sea. The sea is calling me. And there are these beautiful lines. He says, I cannot rest from travel. Once a traveler, always a traveler. Once an explorer, always an explorer. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. Shakespeare pai amra. Drinking life to the lees. যখন আমরা চা খাই বা কফি খাই, লাস্টে একটু হলেও ছেড়ে দিই কেন? বিকজ লাস্টে ওখানে হয়তো চা পাতাটা, ড্রেজেস গুলো হয়তো পড়ে রয়েছে। বাট ড্রিঙ্কিং লাইফ টু দ্য লিজ মিনস ড্রিঙ্কিং লাস্ট ড্রপ অব্দি। চা পাতাগুলোকেও ছাড়া হবে না, কোর্স কফি বিনস এর পার্ট গুলোকেও ছাড়া হবে না, সবটা, দ্য গুড অ্যান্ড দ্য ব্যাড, like I say, the ugly and the grotesque, along with the beautiful and the sublime. I will take it all, he says, right? Why? Because that is, the path and the portion of the traveler. All times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly. আমি এনজয়ও করেছি আমার ট্রাভেলসে, আমি সাফারও করেছি। I have been on the land, I have been on the sea, I have been on the mountains, I have been at the depth of the sea as well. I am become a name. Travel করেছি, এত এক্সপ্লোর, যে এত মানুষ, places, civilizations, যে I am become a name. I have gained fame, I am famous. Okay, much have I seen. Yes, anybody saying anything? Yes. I will read the lines again. He says, all times I have enjoyed. তিন চারটে লাইন নিচে আছে দেখো, I am become a name. For always rowing with a hungry heart, much have I seen and known. Cities of men and manners, climates, councils, governments, myself not least, but honored of them all, and drunk delight of battle with my peers far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. I am a part of all that I have met. I have traveled, I have gone all over the world. In my travels, I have gone to the land and the sea, the mountains and the depths of the sea. I have met all kinds of people, all kinds of languages I have heard. I have encountered so many cultures, and আমি তাদের থেকে শিখেছি, এবং আমার নিজের একটা ইম্প্যাক্ট, একটা ইমপ্রিন্ট আমি তাদের উপরে ছেড়ে এসেছি, as a result of which I am honored of them all, and I am, a part of all that I have met. আমি তাদের থেকে শিখেছি, তারা আমার থেকে শিখেছে। All my experiences and I have become intertwined. We have become interrelated. We are now inseparable. So inseparable is this wanderlust, is this thirst for travel, for exploring in him, that he cannot rest from it, even though he is now old and tired. But he says, Jena, থেমে গেলে হবে না, we must continue. Okay, let us read. আর মাঝখানে এগুলো খুব বেশি পড়বো না। নিজের রাজত্বের দায়িত্ব ছেড়ে দিয়ে যাচ্ছে নিজের ছেলের ওপরে। Okay, he talks about his son. This is my son, mine own Telemachus, to whom I leave the scepter and the isle. রাজা চলে যাচ্ছে, ঠিক যেরকম রামায়ণে রাম চলে গেছিল, কিন্তু রাজা চলে গেলে তো হলো না, কাউকে ছেড়ে যেতে হবে, একটা রিজেন্ট কাউকে ছেড়ে যেতে হবে। ঠিক যেরকম ভরত তার খড়মগুলোকে রেখে he continued to rule in his name. Similarly, he says, this is my son Telemachus, তার কাছে আমি রেখে গেলাম আমার এই স্কেপটার, আমার এই আইল্যান্ড, আমার এই কিংডম, আমার ওয়াইফ, তার মাদারকে, সবাইকে ছেড়ে রেখে যাচ্ছি, but I alone must go. He will do his work, he says, last line, he will perform all the duties, he will pay all the meet adoration to my household gods when I am gone. আমি চলে গেলে আমি জানি ভালো জনের হাতে আমি দায়িত্ব রেখে যাচ্ছি। He works his work, I mine. He will be a good king, he's young, but I am old and I must go. I must go on exploring. And then he talks about how, as he reaches the shore, almost like in cinema, this is cinematographically portrayed, he read এবার সবকিছু ছেড়ে দিয়ে, নিজের প্রাসাদ, নিজের ছেলে, নিজের বউ, সবাইকে ছেড়ে দিয়ে চলে এসেছে to the seashore. And the time of the day is very interesting, very important, very symbolic. সন্ধ্যা হচ্ছে, twilight, মানে দিনটা শেষ হচ্ছে, ঠিক কিডসের অটোমোডের মতো, সন্ধ্যা হয়ে যাচ্ছে, বছরটা শেষ হয়ে যাচ্ছে, দিনটা শেষ হয়ে যাচ্ছে, লাইফটাও শেষ হয়ে আসছে। Why? Because Ulysses at this point of time is also growing old. There lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail. দাঁড়িয়ে আছে, অন্ধকার হয়ে আসছে, হয়তো হালকা ঝড় উঠছে। The vessel stands braving the elements, braving the water and the wind, standing there like the human soul, like the human spirit of exploration, of discovery. There gloom the dark, broad seas. অন্ধকার, ঝড়, তার মধ্যে ভেসেলটা একা লড়ে চলেছে। Will perhaps, remind you of Rupam's song, বেঁচে থাকার গান, তাই না? Also, অনুপমের সেম অটোগ্রাফ থেকে গানটা, জাহাজ মাসুল ছাড়খার তবু গল্প লিখছি বারবার, ইউলিসিস, দ্য সেন্সিবিলিটি অফ ইউলিসিস, রাইট? সব ভেঙে যেতে পারে, চুরমার হয়ে যেতে পারে, বাট ইউ মাস্ট কন্টিনিউ অন, ইউ ক্যানট গিভ আপ। Okay, my mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me. এই mariners, same mariners of the lotus eaters, যারা কিন্তু টায়ার্ড ছিল। কিন্তু এখানে রাজাকে জিজ্ঞেস করছে তাদেরকে, তোমরা কি টায়ার্ড, তোমরা কি যাবে আমার সাথে? No, they are not given a choice, they must go. That is the reason why they did not want to leave the lotus island. They are tired. তারা জাহাজ চালিয়ে নিয়ে যাবে, কিন্তু তাদের নাম আমরা জানি না। নাম শুধু কার ফেমাস হবে? Who has become a name? Only Ulysses. Only Odysseus himself, no other name, and that is the tragedy of the mariners. Okay, but the king says we must go again. The thunder and the sunshine, you know, in everything, in all kinds of weather, in everything, we must not stop. Okay. The last few lines I must read with you. To sail beyond the sunset, that is his purpose, he says. And the baths of all the western stars, until I die, he's willing to die for, you know, to quench his wanderlust. He's willing to die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down, ডুবে যাবো কোনো ঝড়ে. It may be we shall touch the happy isles. In Greek myth, you know, the Elysium, যেখানে the souls of those who have gone to heaven reside. এবং সেই হ্যাপি আইলসকে যদি খুঁজে পাই, সেই এলিশিয়ামকে যদি খুঁজে পাই, তাহলে কার সাথে দেখা হবে? অনেক পুরনো বন্ধু, অ্যাকিলিস, দ্য গ্রেট অ্যাকিলিস whom we know. Though much is taken, much abides. চলে গেছে, অনেক কিছু চলে গেছে, অনেক বন্ধুরা চলে গেছে, মারা গেছে, ইউথ চলে গেছে, এনার্জি চলে গেছে অনেক, সময় চলে গেছে অনেক, কিন্তু যেইটুকু পড়ে আছে, দ্য ড্রেজেস, সেইটুকুকে ছেড়ে দিলে হবে না, গিভ আপ করলে হবে না। Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved heaven, earth and heaven, that which we are. আগের মতো হয়তো নই, কিন্তু যা আছি, even that is enough. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Beautiful lines, truly inspiring. Even if you die, it doesn't matter. But till the last moment that you have breath inside your body, you must strive to attain your full potential. You must seek what you have started, you know, to seek. You must find what you are searching for. If it is fame, then you must find fame. If it is name, if it is success, if it is accomplishment, whatever you're looking for, you must, if you set out, you must achieve that, even if it comes at a very high price, and not to yield. Inspiring from them, for them, inspiring for us if we apply it, you know, psychologically to our lives, you know, ambitions and aims and objectives, you know. But of course, এই কথাগুলো কেন বলছেন টেনিসন ইউলিসিসের ভয়েসে? Because he was trying to provide inspiration, motivation, encouragement to all those hundreds and thousands of colonizers যারা তাদের বাড়ি ছেড়ে দিয়ে একটা দূর কোনো কন্টিনেন্টে চলে যায়, you know, to Africa, to Asia, to America, যেখানে গিয়ে তারা তাদের দেশের জন্য they were, you know, working, ensuring that the colonial project went on. So somewhere here, there is a very deep political propaganda, a very deep political agenda. And as much as we must be aware of that agenda, of the colonial undertones of the poem, nevertheless, we must also acknowledge as students of literature how absolutely astonishingly beautiful, you know, and lyrical this poet, you know, this poem is, and how beautiful a poem, you know, a poet Tennyson was. The show must go on. Absolutely, absolutely. You must continue and not give up. Okay. So Tennyson, a very major poet. Motamoti clear the kind of sensibility that we were looking at. Okay. ছোট্ট করে আর ওটাকে রেফার করব না, বাট জাস্ট বলে দিই আরেকটা খুব ইম্পর্টেন্ট পোয়েম যেটার নাম লেখা ছিল ইন মেমোরিয়াম। Okay, so In Memoriam is another very important work which further consolidated, you know, Tennyson's reputation as poet laureate. যেটা উনি লিখেছিলেন in and around the year 1833, যখন ওনার ভীষণ ভালো বন্ধু, অনেকে বলে there was a homoerotic relationship between them, Arthur Henry Hallam. And Arthur, who was brilliant and young and handsome and rich, and he had a very promising future in front of him, Arthur হঠাৎ করে মারা যায় খুব কম বয়সে, when he was far away from Tennyson and the other family members. He was away from England at that point of time. এবং তার মৃত্যুতে there was a great cloud of sorrow, of desperation, of desolation that overtook Tennyson, যেটা তার nearly 20 years লেগে গেছিল to get over. Imagine the amount of love that he had, homoerotic or not, friendly or not, we do not have to care what kind of love it was, but love it was. And I will share. I will go there, absolutely, yes, because I do not have anything much written there. সেই জন্য আমি এখনো share করিনি. So it is basically in memoriam, charts that growth. It starts with the absolute desolation that Tennyson feels when his friend dies, moves on to a questioning of the religious faith, questions God, questions God's justice. কি করে এরকম young successful একজন মানুষকে on the way to success কি করে তাকে God নিয়ে নিতে পারে, কি করে সে মারা যেতে পারে, এই questions of personal crisis, ultimately moving on, getting over that crisis. Remember, in a period যেখানে religious crisis was part and parcel of everyday life of every human heart, in the Victorian period, সেইখানে উনি কিন্তু ultimately এটাকে overcome করছেন, এই ক্রাইসিসটাকে, এই ডাউট গুলোকে, and finally he is able to reach a point of belief, a kind of re-establishing of the faith in God, in oneself, in heaven, in the afterlife, and all of that. And therefore this poem was greatly celebrated and appreciated by Queen Victoria herself when her beloved husband Prince Albert passed away. তখন উনি নিজে এসে দেখা করে গেছিলেন টেনিসনের সাথে to congratulate him and to tell him how instrumental and helpful his poem had been, to help her, to enable her to overcome her own grief on the death of her husband. Okay, so that is another poem that I hope someday you will have the time to look at in detail. Right now, the next PPT that we are going to look at, I hope again it is visible. So we are done with
Yes, visible.
Yes, visible. Okay, right. So the next one we are looking at is of course Browning. এবার আমি আরো অনেকটা তাড়াতাড়ি যাব. I only have about half an hour left, so I will try to quickly go through this.
না তোমার তো সময় রয়েছে, তুমি সময় নিয়ে বলো।
Okay, thank you, Arindam. Thank you so much. So Browning, one of my personal favorites, and I think যারা পড়েছে তাদের প্রত্যেকের হয়তো favorite, because this man, my God, he knew psychoanalysis. He knew psychoanalysis, before psychoanalysis became, very fashionable and very important. This is a man who was extremely interested in, like I said before, the aberrant psychologies. He was interested in understanding the mentality, the psychology, the mind of the sinner, the mind of the psychopath, of the sociopath, of the murderer. And he did not shy away from expressing them, from representing them in his poems, even though, and that was one of the main reasons why he was largely misunderstood by so much of the Victorian population. কেন তাকে অনেকেই পছন্দ করেনি তখন, and his fame came much later, right? So very quickly, I think two of the poems that many of you are already aware of, কিন্তু তবু একবার একটুখানি হলেও রেফার করব, Porphyria's Lover and My Last Duchess, right? So let me go on to the poem. So what am I getting? My Last Duchess, yes. Right, so that's my Last Duchess painted on the wall. I think almost all of you here are very well aware.
Hello, Abhinanda, are you there? তোমরা কি আমার কথা শুনতে পাচ্ছ সবাই?
হ্যাঁ স্যার, আপনার পাচ্ছি, ম্যামের পাচ্ছি।
স্যার আপনার পাচ্ছি ম্যামের পাচ্ছি না।
বেশ বেশ বেশ, এক সেকেন্ড দেখছি।
হ্যাঁ স্যার পাচ্ছি শুনতে।
হ্যাঁ, ম্যাডামের ল্যাপটপ অফ হয়ে গেছে, আসছেন, একটু 2 মিনিট মতো সময় দিতে হবে, 2-5 মিনিট সময় দাও, একটু অপেক্ষা করো। হ্যাঁ,
ওকে স্যার।
তুমি সময়ের সঙ্গে ট্র্যাক করতে পারো, কারণ আমি আসছি, এক সেকেন্ড। তো আমি যেটা বলছিলাম সেটা হচ্ছে, এই ধরনের অ্যাড অন কোর্স করার যেটা ওয়ান অফ দ্য প্রাইমারি অবজেক্টিভস ইজ দ্যাট ইউ you should acquaint with the chronology and the historiography of the history of English literature, যেটা সিবিসিএস এর একটা বিরাট বড় সমস্যা বলে ম্যাডামও বলছিলেন। তোমরা অনেকেই ক্রোনোলজিটা বোঝো না, ফ্রম দ্য অ্যাংলো-স্যাক্সন ডাউন টু দ্য পোস্টমডার্ন পিরিয়ড, এবং ভেরিয়াস পোয়েটিক মুভমেন্টস, ভেরিয়াস ইন্টেলেকচুয়াল এন্ড সোশ্যাল মুভমেন্টস, অথার্স, পোয়েটস, তারা কোন কোন সময়ে পরপর কিভাবে আসছেন, এটা অনেকেই তোমরা ধরতে পারো না। সেইটা বোঝার জন্য এই হিস্ট্রি অফ ইংলিশ লিটারেচার কোর্স, আশা করছি তোমরা প্রত্যেকেই উপকৃত হচ্ছ। বলো, আমি কালকে অনেকের সঙ্গে কথা বলছিলাম, পরমেশ্বর পরমানন্দ এদের সঙ্গে, যে আদৌ কোনো উপকার হচ্ছে কিনা, সেটা একটু তোমরা আমাকে বলো যে তোমাদের মানে উপকার হচ্ছে কিনা।
হ্যাঁ স্যার অবশ্যই হচ্ছে উপকার।
এবং যারা 6 সেমেস্টারে পড়ো, মাস্টার ডিগ্রি এন্ট্রান্স এক্সামিনেশন দেবে, তাদের কিন্তু মানে এটা মানে কম্পালসারি, মানে মানে পড়তেই হবে আর কি। এখান থেকেই কোয়েশ্চেন পড়বে। যা অনেকে নেট অ্যাসপিরেন্ট, সুনিতা ইজ দেয়ার এন্ড মেনি আদার্স আর দেয়ার, যারা নেট দিচ্ছে বা দেবে, নেট দিয়েছে এরকম লোকও করছে কোর্সটা। ইন্দ্রনীল কোর্স করছিল, হি ইজ এ জিআরএফ হোল্ডার অফ আওয়ার ডিপার্টমেন্ট। তাদেরও কিন্তু এই কোর্সটা খুবই খুবই কাজে লাগবে। ফলে প্রত্যেকে কোর্সটাকে একটু মানে শোনো, যাতে মানে ইনফরমেশন গুলো এবং স্পিরিট অফ দ্য এজ, এই বিষয়টা তোমাদের একটু তোমরা একটু বুঝতে পারো। ফলে এটাই ছিল আমার মেইন অবজেক্টিভ, টু কন্ডাক্ট সাচ এ কোর্স। অফকোর্স আমার প্ল্যান ছিল টু কন্ডাক্ট সাচ এ কোর্স ইন অ্যান অফলাইন মোড। ইয়েস, আই থিঙ্ক অভিনন্দা ইজ দেয়ার।
I have joined Orindom. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Audible, absolutely
so
audible.
sorry.
So yeah, no, ব্যাপারই না।
I'm so sorry. এটাই তো টেকনিক্যাল এই সেশনগুলোর প্রবলেম, মানে হাজারটা,
না না,
এজন্যই অফলাইনে
এই জন্যই অফলাইনে অনেক সুবিধা। ঠিক আছে, মানে স্টুডেন্টকে বলছিলাম, আমরা এই প্রোগ্রামটা হয়েছে, নেক্সট সেশনে উইল হ্যাভ অ্যান অনলাইন সেমিনার অর অ্যান অ্যাড অন কোর্স লাইক দিস। ঠিক আছে, অবশ্যই।
রাইট, একদম একদম কারেক্ট। Okay, so I will have to share my screen.
Yes, you have to share it.
Entire screen বলেছিলেন না অরিন্দম?
Entire screen.
Entire screen, হ্যাঁ।
Yes.
Okay, yes.
অভিনন্দন, এখনো তুমি ভিজিবল নয়, তুমি চাইলে তুমি ভিজিবল হতে পারো। ওকে,
আচ্ছা,
যদি তুমি চাও। বেশ বেশ।
Right. Okay. So, right. So as I was saying, before I got so rudely interrupted, by technical issues. Here is one of the most famous poems, not only by Robert Browning, but one of the most famous of the entire Victorian poetic genre, I think, The Last Touches. And many of you here are already aware, which makes it so much more interesting to read it together, that here is a Duke Alfonso, who has the legacy of an 800-year-old name. And again, I think, a typical bourgeois who claims, he's better than everybody precisely because he has the legacy of an 800-year-old name. And he claims to be a connoisseur of art, of music and what not, mostly art. And his wife, last Duchess, who he claims was not worthy of that legacy because she was too sweet, she was too kind, she was too gentle with everybody. She did not give him the privilege that he thinks he deserves, right? And of course, the whole poem is known for how brilliantly Browning manages to not only bring out, through the form of the dramatic monologue, not only to bring out the the arrogance and the psychopathic mentality of the Duke himself, but how, while he thinks that he's pointing out all the errors in the ways and the manners of his wife, how he manages to actually prove and point to the virtues that his late wife had, but for which she had to pay very dearly with her life. Sorry. Okay. So he says, she had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. How can you? How dare you be so easily impressed? Na kuchu ektu hote hobe, like Darcy, right? Otherwise, if you are too kind and too sweet, it does not reflect upon your class well. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, it was all one. So when I gave her a gift, and when some officious fool broke a bough of cherries for her from the orchard, it was all the same. How could she? How could she not be more aware of all the expectations that came with her rank and her class? Somehow, she thanked men good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she rang the gift, my gift of a 900 years old name. Sorry. 900 years, Baba, good thing I cannot fall victim to him. Or for 100 years, skipping 100 years from his legacy, I could have had to pay very dearly. So as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. Who would stoop to blame that sort of trifling? And that, I think, is the point of interest in Browning's poetry, that Browning never at any point of time, whether it be in the this poem or Porphyria's Lover or Frali Polycure or The Ring and the Book, any of the poems, if you read, he never for once pretends to apologize for the kind of mentality that he's reflecting. He knows it is not his, but he's not willing to apologize for what the others are thinking. That is, I think, for me, a clear rejection of the Victorian prudery that the Victorian period was known for. A clear rejection of those hegemonic values. Je na, apnara korte paren otake value, but ami kintu I will give voice to all of these, because it's like a proverbial dust take raged niche ঢুকিয়ে দেওয়া যেতে পারে, কিন্তু the dust is still there. So even if you do not want to acknowledge that there are these aberrant personalities and psychologies, you can pretend that they are not there, but it doesn't mean that they are not there. They are present, and he brings them to the forefront and makes us confront things that are purported to make us very deliberately uncomfortable. Bhababe. I think, this is one of the, greatest features of Browning's poetry. It stays with you long after you're done reading them. Not because it gives you a sense of beauty, like romantic poetry would, like, even some of the earlier poems of Tennyson would, but rather because it makes you so innately, so inherently uncomfortable. Like you've confronted something that you're not yet ready to deal with. You do not know how to deal with, right? If you fall amongst the masses, that is. So who'd stoop to blame that sort of this sort of trifling, even if had you skill? I'll just skip that part. And therefore he says those famous lines, I choose never to stoop. It is my deliberate choice, even if it is for my wife, but I will not choose. So before a husband, I am a duke with a 900-year-old name. So I will not do for her what I would not do for the others either. Oh, sir, she smiled whenever, no doubt, whenever I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. So I will not stoop down to train her, to teach her what is expected of her as the member of the bourgeois. I will not tell her how she's supposed to conduct herself or not. If she learns on her own, if she understands my displeasure, good. If she doesn't, I still have my command, and that is the command that he gave, where all her smiles stopped together, clearly perhaps hinting at a murder that had been commanded. And now she stands as if there she stands as if alive. She's now become a picture. And now she is safe. Now she is perfect, even to the Duke, because now she is nothing but an aesthetic work of beauty. Now it cannot create any more trouble. It cannot displease the Duke anymore. Right? And finally, of course, the poem ends with that very famous image of taming, the seahorse, Neptune taming the seahorse, meaning just as Neptune is the lord of the seas, so is this Duke Alfonso the lord of his realm, of his kingdom, of his dukedom, and nobody goes against him to survive. Right? And of course, the last poem by Browning that we need to look at, it is, of course, Porphyria's Lover. Okay. So what happens in Porphyria's Lover, you already perhaps know, maybe you are aware of it. So here is basically, a lover. He's a low-class man again. He's not very rich. He's not aristocratic, but the beloved, the girl, is. And they have been forbidden from being with one another because of the class difference between them. But the girl, on a very windy, rainy, stormy night, she escapes from her house while there is a party going on, and she comes to meet her lover secretly. We do not even know, Browning does not even care to give us a name, but we do have the name of the girl, Porphyria. The lover is simply that. That is his capacity in the poem. He is Porphyria's lover, and nothing more and nothing less. That is his identity. And why is the poem again one of the most famous of Browning's? Because of what the lover does. So while the woman comes and sits with him and tries to talk with him, remember, she's the only one that's talking because the lover is not communicating. But the whole poem, while Porphyria is talking, she কথা বলে যাচ্ছে তার lover-এর সাথে, এসে আগুনটাকে জ্বালাচ্ছে, নিজের ওভারকোটটাকে খুলে রাখছে, নিজে ভিজে গেছে বৃষ্টির মধ্যে, she's drying her hair, she's drying herself. All the time she's putting up a very friendly banter with her lover, but the lover is sitting there and observing her and doing nothing else. কেন? তার মাথাতে তখন এই ইন্টেরিয়র মনোলগটা চলছে পুরো পোয়েমটা. He's observing, and he realizes that at this point she is mine. At this point she is beautiful, she's young, she is pure, she's not yet anybody else's. But if I let her go, we will never be together, but she will inevitably be married off to somebody else, and then she will not retain her purity as she is now. Right? And therefore, what conclusion does he draw? What is the solution, the resolution that he ends up with? He says the best way is simply to kill her, right? To preserve her purity, to preserve her perfection. If she were to die now, she will forever remain this beautiful, this young, this pure, this perfect, and most importantly, mine. She will always just be mine, right? So when she comes and sits close to him, makes him put his, head against her shoulder, and she has long yellow hair. I do not have the time to go into all that symbolism, although it's brilliant and it's sad to miss it. But of course, he draws her hair, wounds it round and round her neck, and pulls it tight. And she dies, and he says, I'm sure she did not feel any pain. I love her. I would not want to hurt her. I will not want to cause her any pain, but I want to kill her so that she can always remain mine in death, right? So let's just look at the last part. That's it, right? I found the thing to do. Just like that, I found a thing to do. And all her hair in one long yellow string, I wound 3 times her little throat around and strangled her. As simple as that. No qualms, no moral qualms, no problem at all. Right? No pain felt she. I'm quite sure she felt no pain. মেরেছি কিন্তু খুব আস্তে করে ভালোবেসে মেরেছি। কিচ্ছু লাগেনি তার। As a shut bud that holds a bee, I warily opened her lids. চোখটা খুলে দেখে। Again, laughed the blue eyes without a stain. She's dead, but he's opening her eyes to check if she's dead or not. And I untightened when he has ensured, when he's sure that she is dead, he untightens next the tress, the hair about her neck, খুলে দিল, যেটা দিয়ে তাকে গলায় ফাঁস দিয়ে মেরেছে। Her cheek once more blushed bright beneath my burning kiss. Imagine holding a corpse and kissing it, touching it. Only, and I propped her head up as before, only this time my shoulder bore her head. আগের বার ওর কাঁধে আমি মাথা রেখেছিলাম, এবার আমার কাঁধে ওর মাথা রাখা, because she's dead, right? Which droops upon it still. And while he's saying the poem, we realize we are confronting this dramatic moment frozen in time by Browning. When we are reading this poem, in that stormy night outside, in that cottage inside, that warm cottage inside with the fire brightly lit in the fireplace, he is sitting, the lover is sitting with her dead body propped up against his body. He's sitting there holding her after having killed her so unscrupulously. She is still, he's using the present tense. The smiling, rosy little head, so glad it has its utmost will, that all its scorn at once is fled, and I, its love, am gained instead. ও তো এটাই চেয়েছিল, পরফিরিয়া তো এটাই চেয়েছিল আমার হয়ে থাকতে. So I granted her her wish. He's now become transformed, metamorphed into a godlike figure. God grants your wishes. No, in her case, I have granted her her wish. ও আমার হয়ে থাকতে চেয়েছিল, so I have now made her mine. Porphyria's love. She guessed not how her darling one wish would be heard. And thus we sit together now. এখনো বসে আছি. And all night long we have not stirred, and yet God has not said a word. And that one last line gives you all of the Victorian sensibility, in one single condensed line. God has not said a word. Where is God? Where is God? If there was a God at all, then God would perhaps have some objection to make while I was killing her. But while I sit here, having killed her, holding her body in my arms, God has not uttered a single word. So this here is the crisis felt by the Victorian public. Where was God? The continual onslaught by, like I said, people like Marx, who questioned religion, rejected religion as the opiate of the masses, by people like Sigmund Freud, who said that the minds worked in ways that were unfathomable, by people like Darwin, who had questioned the first book of Genesis, and therefore, shaken the very foundation of the entire Bible itself. So the question is, where is God? And if there is no God, then who is going to be the keeper of morality? And who is going to punish the sinners? He's sitting there, unmoved, unchanged, unpunished, Where is God? There is no God. So Nietzsche in the next century would go on to say, God is dead. Now all metaphysics is dead. Right? Now, the next, after this, I'll have to just one more poem that I will do in just a little bit of detail. The others, not so much. I will sort of skip over them. Okay. Yes. So Matthew Arnold, I think if we talk about these few poets in detail, that will give you a fair idea. Okay. So Matthew Arnold, Dover Beach. That is, and a few lines from the scholar Gypsy. Right? Let me just very quickly go on to Dover Beach. আচ্ছা এই অবধি কি বোঝা যাচ্ছে নাকি বেশি বেশি ইন্টেন্স হয়ে যাচ্ছে? Then I will sort of pause maybe, or is it okay so far? The students.
বলো, একটু ফিডব্যাক দাও তোমরা ম্যাডামকে।
একটু বলো।
Ma'am, it is absolutely fine.
It's absolutely fine. Are you sure?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely fine.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for being so patient. All right. Okay. So I will quickly move on. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Right. So Dover Beach. These are poems you cannot skip when you're doing Victorian poetry. Yes. So the poem starts, let me just give you a very brief background. So this is Matthew Arnold, who is on his honeymoon with his wife. They're newly married. And they have gone to Dover Beach, which is basically where যেখানে ইংল্যান্ড শেষ হচ্ছে, ইংল্যান্ডের লাস্ট শোরটা, লাস্ট বিচটা, ঠিক তার পরেই হচ্ছে ইংলিশ চ্যানেল, ঠিক তার ওপারে ফ্রান্স দেখা যাচ্ছে। এতটাই কাছে যে ফ্রান্সের কোস্টে, ফ্রেঞ্চের কোস্টে রাতের বেলা যে লাইটটা জ্বলছে, সেই লাইটটা পর্যন্ত ম্যাথিউ আর্নল্ড এপার থেকে ডোভার বিচ থেকে দেখতে পাচ্ছে, মাঝখানে ইংলিশ চ্যানেল। It's a peaceful scene he's describing. It's a peaceful backdrop. But we will see how in the course of the poem, this very tenuous, this very fragile piece of the surface will shatter. It will break into 1,000 shards, as it were, to reveal the ugliness and the crisis and the troubles that lurk within. Okay, let's read. The sea is calm tonight. একদম শান্তির পিকচার দিয়ে শুরু করছে। The tide is full, সামনেই সমুদ্র, আকাশে চাঁদ। And typical romantic strain শুরু করছে, আকাশে চাঁদ আছে, সামনে সমুদ্র, চারিদিক শান্ত, ঢেউগুলো আস্তে আস্তে আসছে, এসে উপচে পড়ছে শোরের উপরে, যেখানে রক্স গুলোর সাথে ধাক্কা খাচ্ছে সেখানে একটা গর্জনের মতো করে আওয়াজ করে উঠছে। আমরা সবাই সমুদ্র দেখেছি, আমরা সমুদ্রের আওয়াজ জানি। We know exactly the kind of scene that he's trying to talk about. On the French coast, the light gleams and is gone. Now, this is where the trouble starts creeping up. লাইট দেখতে পাচ্ছি দূরে, এবার আমরা সবাই জানি লাইটের সিম্বলিজম হচ্ছে হোপ, তাই তো? লাইট দেখা যাচ্ছে, the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel, মানে there is hope. ফ্রেঞ্চ কোস্টে উনি আলো দেখতে পাচ্ছিলেন, কিন্তু হঠাৎ করে বলছেন আলোটা চলে গেছে দূরে। তার মানে আলো নিভে গেছে, অন্ধকার হয়ে গেছে, মানে somehow the future, the distance that he's looking at now seems dark. This is happening on two levels, one at the literal level, the other at the metaphorical, the symbolic level. তাহলে একটা লিটারাল লেভেলে ফ্রেঞ্চ কোস্টের আলোটা ছিল, নিভে গেছে। মেটাফরিক্যাল লেভেলে ওটা হচ্ছে আমাদের ফিউচারটা, যেটা অন্ধকার হয়ে গেছে। ওকে, it gleams and is gone. Right. He can hear the sound of the waves coming in the tranquil bay. He says to his wife, come to the window, sweet is the night air. এখনো অব্দি positive images. Only from the long line of spray where the sea meets the moon-blanched land, listen, you hear the grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back and fling at their return up the high strand. Begin and cease and then again begin with tremulous cadence slow and bring the eternal note of sadness in. That is where the sadness comes in. So long things were okay. There was light, there was the moon, there was the sea, there was everything that was peaceful and calm and tranquil. But suddenly, why does the sound of the waves crashing upon the shore remind him of sadness? Because he realizes just how alone they are. He realizes, now being alone can be a romantic notion, কিন্তু তার কাছে এটা romantic লাগছে না, because ওনার মনে হচ্ছে হয়তো প্রত্যেকটা মানুষ is an island unto herself or himself. তার মনে হচ্ছে, সে রিয়েলাইজ করছে যে আমরা কতটা বাকিদের থেকে, একে অপরের থেকে as a civilization, as a culture, as a community, as a society, আমরা কিভাবে একে অপরের থেকে fragmented হয়ে যাচ্ছি, আমরা isolated হয়ে যাচ্ছি from one another, যেটা বললাম, যেটা টি.এস. এলিয়টের মধ্যে আমরা পাবো in the course of a few decades. Now, Dover Beach was published in 1867. আর আমরা এলিয়টের ওয়ার্কস গুলো পাচ্ছি, আমরা প্রুফরগ দেখেছি 1912, the 1910s. We are looking at 1922, that year when the Wasteland was published. তাহলে 1910-এর আশেপাশে যদি আমরা ধরি, তাহলে 67 মানে অলমোস্ট 70 হয়ে গেছে, হার্ডলি a matter of 30-40 years. তাহলে এই যে মানে ওই টেরিবল সেন্সিবিলিটি, মডার্ন সেন্সিবিলিটি অফ disintegration and fragmentation যেটা এলিয়ট ফিল করছেন, রিপ্রেজেন্ট করছেন in his poetry, তাহলে তার থেকে 40 বছর আগে কতটা ডিফারেন্স হবে? Not much. Already the wheels of modernity and alienation and fragmentation were in motion, and that is exactly what people like Matthew Arnold were recognizing and portraying, voicing in and through their poetry. So when he talks about the eternal note of sadness, he talks about how Sophocles, Oedipus Rex, প্রত্যেকে এখানে পড়েছো, যারা একদম youngest সেমেস্টারে আছো তারাও পড়ে ফেলেছো, যারা সেম 2-তে আছো, right? And you know how Oedipus is one of the greatest tragedies ever written in the Western world, right? It talks about death, it talks about destiny, it talks about fate and how we cannot overcome, how we are subject to destiny. So he thinks of Sophocles, he thinks of tragedy, he thinks of human misery. You see, সারা পৃথিবীর মানুষকে যদি আমরা জিজ্ঞেস করি what is common to all, সবাই খুশি থেকেছে, মানে খুশি থেকেছে এরকম মানুষ সংখ্যাটা হয়তো কম, কিন্তু দুঃখ পেয়েছে এরকম হয়তো এমন কেউ নেই যে বলতে পারবে না যে আমি দুঃখ পাইনি। So more than human happiness, it is human misery, it is human pain and loneliness and suffering which unites us all as an entire human civilization. Matthew Arnold realizes that on the surface আমরা হয়তো ভাবি আমরা ভালো আছি, on the surface হয়তো আমরা ভাবি যে আমরা খারাপ নেই, we are okay, we are happy, we are prosperous, but if you only scratch that surface, তার ভেতরেই কিন্তু ভরা ভরা, ঝুড়ি ঝুড়ি ভরা হয়তো দুঃখ and কষ্ট, right? And this is the human misery that he's recognizing, and he says the sea of faith was once too at the full. কেন এই দুঃখটা? Why this keen consciousness of pain? Because he says, once upon a time, like in those fairy tale beginnings, people were happy. When people had faith, people had belief in God, in themselves, in humanity. They had faith in their institutions. When people believed, যখন তাদের কথা এবং তাদের কাজের মধ্যে there was a সামঞ্জস্য, there was a kind of coherence, there was a kind of similarity, the one reflected the other, they were bound together, they were intertwined. But now we profess to believe in God, but in our lives আমরা পূজা আর্চা করতে পারি, সবকিছু করতে পারি, কিন্তু হয়তো আমাদের লাইফটা যখন আমরা লিড করি, আমরা মিথ্যে বলার আগে ভাবি না, আমরা অন্য কাউকে ব্যাকস্ট্যাপ করার আগে আমরা ভাবি না। So where are we really expressing or practicing what we are talking about? There is a great difference between what we say and what we do, right? We do not believe in institutions anymore. We do not believe in religion, we do not believe in a God, we do not believe in each other, we do not believe that we are true to one another at all. সবকিছুর মধ্যে একটা মিসট্রাস্ট ঢুকে গেছে, সেই কারণেই You realize at the end of the day, দুঃখ পেলে যে আমার উঠিয়ে ফোন করার কতজন আছে যাকে আমি বলতে পারবো যে আমার দুঃখ হচ্ছে। যাকেই ফোন করতে যাবি মনে হবে সে কি আদেও আমাকে বুঝবে, নাকি আমার দুঃখটাকে ঠাট্টা বানিয়ে তারা নিজেরা এন্টারটেইনড হবে। If you have ever felt this, if you have ever felt so lonely that you could not call somebody, a friend or a relative or somebody, to express your pain, to express your misery, to share it with someone, if you have ever felt that, then you already are modern. As modern as C.S. Eliot was more than 100 years back, as modern as Matthew Arnold was, even 50 years prior to that. That is modern. Modern is not really a time. Modern is the sensibility of being dissociated from everything that comes around you. And therefore, this conflict, between science and religion that has, shaken the very core, the fundamentals of Victorian society, of humanity, he says, all that is gone. The sea of faith used to surround us once upon a time, all around. But now I only hear its melancholy, long withdrawing roar. And it is retreating. And once that sea has gone back, niche ki pore ache, shudhu pathor gulo pore ache, only the nakedness. And that brings us to that last, most important stanza of the poem. Our love, he's referring to his wife. Our love, let us be true to one another. True. Where, like I said, your words and your actions match. Where you have affinity, where you owe allegiance to what you believe. For the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new. দেখে মনে হবে স্বপ্নের একটা রাজ্য, স্বপ্নের একটা পৃথিবী। So beautiful, so various, সব আছে, beauty আছে, সবকিছু আছে on the surface, but if you look beneath, it hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. কিচ্ছু নেই, না আছে আনন্দ, না আছে ভালোবাসা, না আছে আলো, না আছে belief or faith or certainty in anything, না আছে শান্তি, না আছে নিজে কষ্ট পেলে কেউ হেল্প করার মতো কেউ। Nobody. Just alone and suffering, each man his or her own island. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. He's of course referring to a very old war called the Peloponnesian War, যেখানে রাত্রিবেলা যুদ্ধ হওয়াতে দুটো আর্মিজ যারা ক্ল্যাশ করেছিল একে অপরের সাথে রাতের অন্ধকারে, তারা সবাইকে মেরেছিল, কারণ অন্ধকারে তারা বন্ধু এবং শত্রুর মধ্যে ডিস্টিংগুইশ করতে পারেনি। এই পেলোপোনেশিয়ান ওয়ারের কথাটা উনি কেন রেফার করে শেষ করছেন কবিতাটাকে? এখানে ইগনোরেন্ট আর্মিস কারা? সায়েন্স এন্ড রিলিজন। সায়েন্স নিজের বক্তব্য রেখে যাচ্ছে at the cost of religion and faith of the greater public. Religion সায়েন্সকে রিজেক্ট করে চলেছে at the cost of remaining ignorant to the scientific discoveries of the period. রিলিজন তার নিজের গ্রাউন্ড ছাড়বে না, সায়েন্স তার নিজের গ্রাউন্ড ছাড়বে না, রাইট? অ্যান্ড তার মাঝখানে এই কিছু মানুষ again যারা ক্ষমতাতে, the scientists on the one hand, the Royal Society of London, আর একদিকে the church, those who were part of the monarchy, the aristocracy, the church, এরাও ছাড়বে না এদের দিকটা। তাহলে মাঝখানে পড়লো কারা? The great mass of all the people. They do not know where to go. They do not know who to support. They do not know which side to fight on. They are lost. And that is the great, Victorian conflict that has been brilliantly expressed by Matthew Arnold in this particular poem. Okay. That being done, I think I've covered most of the important parts. Now I will just quickly go through some of these. Okay. They all are brilliant poets. They all require, in-depth discussion, but we do not have so much time. So I will just run you through the most important works that they are known for. So Elizabeth Barrett Browning is of course also the wife of Robert Browning. Kintu eta ajke dariye bolte pari, কিন্তু এটা বলতে হবে যে ভিক্টোরিয়ান পিরিয়ডে রবার্ট ব্রাউনিং would have been known as the husband of Elizabeth Barrett, because উনি তখন ফেমাস ছিলেন না, Elizabeth was famous. She was an intellectual and a poet in her own right, and she had gained fame much before her husband did. Okay, so her famous works include Aurora Lay. This is a poem that deals in detail, that celebrates the importance of women's education. It deals with how important education is for women, why all women should be given education irrespective of class, irrespective of caste. Of course, they don't have the caste system, but irrespective of all social barriers, কেন মেয়েদেরকে পড়াশোনা করতে দেওয়া উচিত এবং কি করে তাদের ডেভেলপমেন্ট হবে following that education, তাদের emancipation হবে of the mind, body and soul, তাদের prospects widen হবে. All of these things she talks about in Aurora Lay. And the sonnets from the Portuguese, which is more personal, আগেরটা যতটাই public, আগেরটা যতটাই relevant to the greater public, the sonnets from the Portuguese was a series of poems that she wrote to her husband Robert Browning. They were very much in love with one another, and these are more love poems where she celebrates her relationship with her husband. Okay, but very famous nevertheless. Now Christina Rossetti, again, you have read her, therefore I do not need to go too much into detail. Goblin Market, where again we have a gendered perspective, where we see this woman, again a very religious, devout Catholic woman, and she is talking about how in Goblin Market, how you can be easily misled by the raw sexuality of men, by, it can be read and interpreted on so many different angles, which I'm sure you're aware of. It can be looked at from the post-colonial angle, it can be looked at from the feminist angle, it can be looked upon, from so many different angles. Right? But in any case, it is a warning. Next is, of course, Swinburne. And Swinburne এর শুধু একটা পোয়েমেরই কথা আমি একটুখানি বলবো, সেটা হচ্ছে Hymn to Proserpine, the last one. Okay. Now Swinburne was known for being a red flag. ওনাকে describe করা হয়েছিল as dangerous, a living, standing, breathing red flag. কেন? Because উনি রিজেক্ট করেছিলেন any of the religious hypocrisies of the Victorian period, so much so that he rejected almost বলা হয় Christianity as a whole. He was more of a pagan in his heart. And in Hymn to Proserpine, who is basically in Greek myths, হয়তো তোমরা জানবে, she was the queen of the underworld, wife of Hades, right? The king of the underworld, brother to Poseidon, the sea king, and brother of Zeus as well, who was the king of the gods. Hades এর wife, কিছুটা টাইম অর্ধেক বছর সারফেসের উপরে ল্যান্ড আর্থে কাটান, বাকিটা টাইম ইয়েতে থাকেন, হেডিসে থাকেন, আন্ডারওয়ার্ল্ডে থাকেন. And here is a poet in the Victorian period who is talking about Proserpine, and in this hymn he tells her that I am a pagan at heart and I celebrate these because these anthropomorphic religions, like Greek religion, Hindu religion, এরা মানুষ centric religions, তাই তো এদের ভগবানরা হচ্ছে মানুষদের মতো, not like the Christian God or the God of Judaism or the Islamic God, who is much higher, on a much higher plane than the rest of humanity. And he says that I celebrate these anthropomorphic gods. Why? Because they have in them the passion for life. They have intensity, unlike the godheads of these Abrahamic religions, like I said, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. And he is telling in this poem that I do not believe in Christ. Jesus Christ ke bolchen o pale Galilean. Jesus Christ was from Galilee. In the Bible আমরা দেখতে পাই, বলছে ওকে বলছে পেল গ্যালিলিয়ান, যে তোমারই মতো পেল ফ্যাকাশে তোমার রিলিজিয়নটা যারা ফলো করে। They have taken away the zest for life, they have taken away the passion for life. তারা কোনো কিছুকে কোয়েশ্চেন করতে দেয় না, তারা কোনো কিছুকে থ্রেটেন করতে দেয় না। They just deal with power. তারা impose করে নিজেদের opinion গুলো, নিজেদের ideas গুলো on everybody else. But that is not how I want to be. That is not the kind of creed that I want to follow, but rather I want to celebrate, life and the earth and the physical, existence as the anthropomorphic religions did. And that is what he sort of, crystallizes in his poem, Hymn to Proserpine. Now, the pre-Raphaelites were very, very interesting. This here is the photo of Dante Gabriel Rossetti, who is the most famous of all the pre-Raphaelite poets. এবং এরা কিন্তু হয়তো তোমরা জানো, এরা were both poets and painters. Because they were all tremendously accomplished painters, এদের পোয়েট্রির মধ্যে কিন্তু আমরা রীতিমতো দেখতে পাই ছবি আঁকতে। ডেসক্রিপশন গুলো এমন ভাবে দেওয়া মনে হবে যেন কেউ শব্দ দিয়ে ছবি এঁকে দিচ্ছে। ওকে, Dante Gabriel Rossetti's সবথেকে ফেমাস পোয়েম হচ্ছে দ্য ব্লেসেড ড্যামোজেল, রিটেন ইন 1815, যেটা ওনাদের একটা জার্নাল ছিল কল্ড দ্য জার্ম। সেখানে পাবলিশড হয়েছিল। and here he talks about how this woman who has died and gone to heaven এ গিয়ে you are only supposed to think of God, কিন্তু blessed damsel, she is blessed, therefore সে স্বর্গে গেছে, স্বর্গে গিয়ে ভগবানের দিকে পিছনটা দিয়ে she is standing, picture দেখো, she is standing on the near the walls of heaven, এবং সেখানে সে টাচ করছে তার বডিটা। Remember, now this is very interesting because heaven you are not even supposed to have a body, you're supposed to be pure soul, কিন্তু সে কিন্তু ওটার উপরে হাত দিয়ে দাঁড়িয়ে আছে, এরকম এমন ভাবে দাঁড়িয়েছে যে তার বডি থেকে হিটটা ট্রান্সফার হয়ে গরম হয়ে যাচ্ছে যে জায়গাটা সে ধরে আছে, তার মানে ফিজিক্যাল এক্সিস্টেন্স আছে, তাই তো। অ্যান্ড আকাশে দাঁড়িয়ে, হেভেনে দাঁড়িয়ে নিচে আর্থের দিকে তাকিয়ে তার লাভারকে খুঁজছে, কোথায় গেল আমার লাভার, ও মরে গেছে, মরে হেভেনে চলে এসছে, এবং আর্থে তার লাভারকে খুঁজে বেড়াচ্ছে। সেই জায়গাগুলো দেখছে যেখানে দে ইউজ টু গো টুগেদার, ফ্রিকুয়েন্ট টুগেদার, এন্ড শি ইজ ইমাজিনিং হোয়াট ইজ মাই লাভার ডুইং উইদাউট মি। মানে তার স্বর্গে গিয়েও তার মন পড়ে আছে সমস্তটা on earth with her beloved lover, and she's literally waiting for when he will die and come up and be with her in heaven. Very interesting, very subversive in a manner. Okay, and this other painting ami na dekhiye parlam na, this is by the other very famous pre-Raphaelite painter John Everett Mills, tar aka Ophelia. Okay, এবং বলা হয় এটা Ophelia of course is from Hamlet, তোমরা হয়তো জানো হ্যামলেটের beloved was Ophelia. She went mad and she died after falling into water. অনেকে বলে যে she committed suicide, অনেকে বলে mistakenly ফুল কুড়াতে গিয়ে পড়ে গেছিল। That has remained a debate in scholarly circles, but nevertheless she died by drowning. All right, and here is a very beautiful depiction of Ophelia as they envision her dead after having drowned in the water, and her body just simply in a tranquil manner floating around in that water. ওকে, এটার জন্য বলা হয় আঁকাটার জন্য এনার মিস্ট্রেসকে বাথটাবের মধ্যে শুয়ে, জলের মধ্যে একদম এই ফুল এই গাউন পরিয়ে এভরিথিং তাকে শুয়ে তাকে রিয়েল লাইফে পেইন্ট করে তারপরে এই আশেপাশের পুরো জায়গাটাকে দেখে উনি এঁকেছিলেন বাই বিসাইড রিয়েল river bank. So it's a very interesting history to this particular poem, okay, this particular painting, sorry. Okay, why is this coming? So sorry, I did delete all of this. Oh my god, where are my other slides gone? I am so sorry. I think when my computer got shut down, I don't know if I saved it or not.
Okay, so what you can do, you can just restore, you can just restore the slides by clicking it backwards. ওই উপরে যে আনডু বাটনটা আছে একবার দেখতো, হ্যাঁ দেখতো একবার আসছে কিনা, তাতে আসছে কি
ফরম্যাটটা যেটা ফলো
বুঝতে পেরেছি তার মানে মনে হচ্ছে ওই শাটডাউনের সময়
ওটা হয়তো আমি হয়তো ভুল করে সেভ করতে ভুলে গেছি। ও মাই গড, আই এম সো সরি।
না ডাজন্ট ম্যাটার, বলছি যে অভিনন্দন ইউ ক্যান ডু, যেখানে এটাকে সেভ করেছিলিস ইন হুইচ ফোল্ডার, সেই ফোল্ডারে গিয়ে দেখো যে আর একটা স্লাইড আছে কিনা ইন কম্প্যাটিবিলিটি মোড।
Let me check that.
No, it's not there, right?
I don't think so. আমাকে এই সাইডের ওই এটা দেখাচ্ছে না, অপশনটা দেখাচ্ছে।
Okay.
Yes, so I think আমি just এমনি wrap up করে দিই তাহলে আমি, হ্যাঁ। Okay, so yes, now the other 2 to 3 poets, very in brief, that I wanted to talk about was 2 of them specifically. Emily Bronte, I thought I'd talk about again. Emily Bronte is, very famous, for the single masterpiece novel that she had written, which is Wuthering Heights. But, two of her poems, especially No Coward Soul Is Mine and Remembrance. Now, these are two very famous poems that, are read very widely. And I think it kind of communicates a very raw sensibility, again, something that is absolutely untamed by the religious debates of the time. And like as the name suggests, no coward soul is mine. She is not afraid, and she's not only not afraid of death, she's not afraid of the unknown future, the uncertainty of the afterlife, but she's also not afraid of going against the everyday discourses that were all floating around in the Victorian period. And but if any of you have ever read or looked at the movie Wuthering Heights, you would know exactly the kind of sensibility that she professed, which is one of the, I think, in my opinion, one of the best written novels in the English language and ever produced in England. Okay, so the other two poets, very shortly, one is Thomas Hardy. Please একটু তোমরা পারলে পরে পড়ে নিও। থমাস হার্ডির দুটো পোয়েমের নাম আমি বলে দিচ্ছি, আমি এখানে দেখিয়েও দিচ্ছি যদি হয়, তোমরা পরে মেবি করতে পারো। So one would be the Roman Road, okay, or maybe I'll just write it here. That I think better. Okay, the Roman Road. It's a very famous poem by Thomas Hardy. Then, of course, you have the Darkling Thrush. Right. The Darkling Thrush, especially etar byapare duto line boli. This is happening on the night of the New Year's Eve. So the year is going to end. And Hardy is sitting there. Hardy, of course, তোমরা again পড়েছো, you are aware, এমন কিছু নতুন নাম বলছি না, because you have read Return of the Native, even though it was a non-detailed text, but তোমরা at least নামটা জানো হয়তো। Now, Hardy himself was first and foremost, he was a poet. ওনার প্রায় 200-র উপরে কবিতা লেখা আছে, ওনার একটা কালেক্টেড ভলিউম আছে যেখানে you find more than 200 of the poems that he has written. And when you read his novels, which are brilliant in their own right, but you can understand the the prose, Hardy's prose drips with poetry. It literally drips with poetry. মানে মনে হবে যেন যখন ডেসক্রিপশন গুলো দিচ্ছেন, যখন রিটার্ন অফ দ্য নেটিভ যদি পড়ো, সেখানে when he is describing Egdon Heath, you would feel, it is poetry, sheer poetry, right? So Darkling Thrusher moddhe, it is night, it is dark, and interestingly, Darkling কথাটা কিন্তু উনি যখন নাম দিচ্ছেন, meaning born of the dark, যেরকম ডাকের বাচ্চা ডাকলিং, সেরকম ডার্কলিং মানে born out of darkness. উনি কিন্তু শব্দটাকে তৈরি করেননি, কয়েন করেননি। এটা আমরা এর আগে পাই, এটা আমরা শেক্সপিয়ারে পাই এই শব্দটা, এবং খুব ইন্টারেস্টিংলি, যেটা হয়তো তোমাদের জানার মধ্যে পড়বে, এই শব্দটা আমরা অলসো পাই ইন জন কিটস's Ode to a Nightingale. Darkling, he says, I have half been in love, with death. And in the dark, I have often called upon him in various names, he says, to take my quiet breath into the air. উনি অন্ধকারের কথা বলছেন, ডেথের কথা বলছেন। এবং এখানে যখন থমাস হার্ডি, when he talks about the darkling thrush, so the thrush, like the nightingale bird, like the skylark, it is a songbird. এবং অন্ধকারের মধ্যে উনি শুধু আওয়াজটা পাচ্ছেন, রাত শেষ হয়ে যাচ্ছে, বছর শেষ হয়ে যাচ্ছে, he can hear the bird that is singing, and he feels that even though the millennium is about to end, and he knows, Hardy was keenly aware of modernity. ওনার প্রত্যেকটা নভেলে there is tragedy. ওনার Abida, you have raised your hand. Can you give me 2 seconds while I finish this thought, and maybe then you can ask me your question, okay? নালে হারিয়ে ফেলবো ট্রেলটা of thought. So Hardyর novels এর মধ্যে কিন্তু আমরা দেখতে পাই, from Return of the Native, no problem at all, no problem. So he, from Return of the Native to name it, in any of the other novels that he has, Tess of the Ubervilles, any of them, you realize that all his characters are suffering, all his characters are fragmented, all his characters are isolated from everybody else that surrounds them, right? কেন হচ্ছে? Because তারা সবাই modern. উনি বলছেন, if you are not suffering. If you have not suffered, if you have not felt alone, you are not modern. All his characters are modern, and therefore they're all suffering, they're all alone. তারা সবাই ট্র্যাজিক লসেস এর মধ্যে দিয়ে যাচ্ছে, এবং ওনার পোয়েট্রির মধ্যেও কিন্তু একদিকে যেমন একটা প্রো রোমান্টিক একটা ডেসক্রিপশন অফ নেচার যেমন এটাও আমরা পাই, সেরকম ভাবে there is also this sensibility of the alienation and the fragmentation that comes with modernity. All right, so Darkling Thrush ওই জন্যই অন্ধকারটাকে ইনভোক করছেন। যখন the নতুন year is coming, the new year, the new millennium is coming, he knows, he's keenly aware that they are stepping into the modern period. Whatever little certainty of the last age was there, of the last century was there, উনি জানেন এগুলো আর টিকবে না, এগুলো আর থাকবে না, সার্ভাইভ করবে না into the next century. এই যে মডার্নিটির কথা বলছি, এই যে ম্যাথিউ আর্নল্ডের কথা বললাম ডোভার বিচে, ওনার যে আরেকটা পোয়েমের নাম দিয়েছিলাম স্কলার জিপসি, ওখানেও উনি বলেছিলেন, স্কলার জিপসি পোয়েমটাতে উনি একটা লাইন বলেছিলেন, দিস স্ট্রেঞ্জ ডিজিজ অফ মডার্ন লাইফ, I'll write that line for you, the strange disease of modern life. Modern, already he was also keenly aware, এবং উনি মডার্নিটিকে বলছেন আমরা যে লাইফটা লিড করি, ইউ অ্যান্ড মি, আমরা এখন পোস্টমডার্নে চলে এসেছি, সেটা অন্য কথা, মডার্নকেও আমরা টপকে গেছি, বাট সেটাকে ওই 1860s এ বলছেন একটা ডিজিজ নাকি, dis-ease. If you break that word down, ease থেকে আসে easy. When you are easy about something, যেখানে ইজটা নেই, যেখানে uncomfortable করে দিচ্ছে, that is disease. Not only as a রোগ, but the lack of comfort. And he says modern life in itself is a disease. You cannot be happy. The pace is too fast. There is nothing stable to stand on. The ground itself is shaken. The ground itself is fragile. You can break through at any point of time. এটাকে কম্পেয়ার করা হয় অনেক সময় একটা ক্লিফের সাথে, ভিক্টোরিয়ান পোয়েট্রিকে, এই যে সেন্সিবিলিটি অফ টেনিসন, সেন্সিবিলিটি অফ ব্রাউনিং, সেন্সিবিলিটি অফ আর্নল্ড, অফ হার্ডি, এনি অফ দ্য মেজর পোয়েটস দ্যাট উই হ্যাভ লুকড অ্যাট, এদেরকে কম্পেয়ার করা হচ্ছে একটা পাহাড়ের সাথে, যেটার সাইডে there is খাদ, there is a deep cliff, এবং মনে হচ্ছে তাদের কবিতাগুলোকে পড়ে যেন অ্যাজ ইফ এরা এই এক পাহাড় থেকে আরেক পাহাড় ওই ডিপ খাদের উপরে একটা দড়ি বাঁধা রয়েছে, তার উপর দিয়ে হেঁটে যাচ্ছে। One moment you are balancing, and one moment of lack of focus, of getting distracted, and immediately you fall into that cliff. There is no saving you. This is falling, trying to retain your faith against the cliff of disbelief that lurks right underneath. যদি ডিসবিলিফের মধ্যে পড়ে যাও, তাহলে all certainties will be taken away from you. এগুলোকেই বলছে the strange disease of modern life. এটাকেই বলছে there is no life, যেটাকে দেখে মনে হচ্ছে ওয়ার্ল্ডটা বিউটিফুল, it is not, right? So he says in Darkling Thrush, he's aware that এগুলো বেঁচে এখন অব্দিও হয়তো দড়ির উপরে তারা দাঁড়িয়েছিল, he knows in the modern period you have to fall into that cliff. এরপরে যদি উঠে বেরিয়ে আসতে পারো তাহলে সেটা অন্য কথা, বাট ডিসবিলিভ এন্ড ফ্র্যাগমেন্টেশন এন্ড এলিয়েনেশন হবেই, কেউ বাঁচাতে পারবে না। Nobody can save you out of that. Only you perhaps can try to climb out of it once you have fallen into it. And the last poet is of course Rudyard Kipling, যার কথা ভেবেছিলাম বলবো। Kipling এর দুটো পোয়েম, one would be The White Man's Burden, টাইপো হয়ে গেল ওখানে, হোয়াইট ম্যানস বার্ডেন, অ্যাজ দ্য নেম সাজেস্ট, ভীষণ কলোনিয়াল একটা পোয়েম, সাংঘাতিক ক্রিটিসাইজড হয়েছেন ফর দিস, যেখানে উনি বলছেন যে আমাদের ওপরে, মানে নট ইউ অ্যান্ড মি, Rudyard Kipling and the other Europeans, the whites, white chamra, the white skin, তাদের ওপরে, because they are civilized, because they are Christian, because they are white, তাদের ওপরে একটা বিশাল দায়িত্ব, it is a burden that they must carry. What is the burden? That of civilizing আমাদের মতো অসভ্য, অশিক্ষিত, ব্যাকওয়ার্ড civilizations, the colonizer, the colonized, that is the colonizer's burden, যে ওরা না এলে নাকি আমাদের রিলিজন নেই, ওরা না এলে সেখানে নাকি আমাদের সায়েন্স নেই, টেকনোলজি নেই, যেটা হয়তো টু অ্যান এক্সটেন্ট সত্যি, আমরা হয়তো টেকনোলজিক্যালি অতটা, সায়েন্টিফিক্যালি বলবো না, বাট অ্যাটলিস্ট টেকনোলজিক্যালি হয়তো অতটা অ্যাডভান্স ছিলাম না, বাট টু সে দ্যাট উই ডু নট হ্যাভ রিলিজন উইদাউট দেম, বাট টু সে দ্যাট উই ডু নট হ্যাভ কালচার উইদাউট দেম, উই ডু নট হ্যাভ লিটারেচার উইদাউট দেম, imagine the kind of mentality that they had, which is of course the typical colonizers mentality. And in this poem he talks about how they must, because they are aware, because they're white and Christian and civilized, tader upore is that onus to share and bring the light of that civilization and Christianity, to all the people around the world, all the colonized people, যাদের কাছে এই আলোগুলো নেই. That was a kind of justification for the colonial project that they were indulging in, even at this period of time. But of course, এই time আমরা already পৌঁছে যাচ্ছি to the end of the 19th century. আমরা already কিন্তু modern-এ ঢুকে গেছি. And the last poem, which is If, হয়তো এটাকে দিয়ে শেষ করতে পারি because it's a very positive poem, so it's again a very motivating poem. So maybe we can just read through a few of the lines and conclude the lecture there. Okay. So he says, it's a short poem. He says, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, the language is very easy, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good, nor talk too wise. So he talks about the virtues of life. অন্যরা তোমার ব্যাপারে বাজে বলুক, তুমি বলো না। অন্যরা তোমার খারাপ করুক, তুমি করো না। অন্যরা তোমাকে ব্লেম করুক, তুমি যদি নিজে জানো that you are not to be blamed, then stand firm and don't compromise your stand. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, মানে স্বপ্ন দেখো কিন্তু don't be blown away by them, don't get lost. If you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster, যদি success পাও বা failure পাও, দুটোকেই যদি equally confront করতে পারো like a stoic, treat those two imposters just the same. না failure বেশি দিন লাইফে থাকে, না success বেশি দিন থাকে লাইফে, কোনোটাই থাকে না। If you can treat them just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you have spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken, and stoop and build them up with worn out tools. যেটা সারা লাইফ খেটে করলে সেটাকে মানুষ গড়তে সারা লাইফ বেরিয়ে যায়, ভাঙতে একটা মোমেন্ট লাগে। তুমি যেটা সারা লাইফ দিয়ে গড়লে সেটা যদি কেউ এসে ভেঙে দিয়ে যায়, তারপরে যদি আবার ওটাকে তৈরি করতে পারো, even though you are tired, even though your tools are all worn out, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings, almost Matthew Arnold-এর লাইনটার মতো, begin and then cease and then again begin. জিতলে, আবার হারলে, আবার শুরু করলে, থেমে গেলে না, that is all that matters. If you can do all of that, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew, mind ke, body ke jodi force korte paro to serve you and not become slave to it yourself, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. Kar kotha mone porbe? Ulysses, Tennyson. The will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Jeta Tennyson bole geche setai If-এ Kipling o bolche. Do not give up. Hold on. The show must go on. If you can do all of this, if you can talk with the crowds and keep your virtue, সবার সাথে মেশো কিন্তু নিজের ইন্ডিভিজুয়ালিটিটাকে যদি মেইনটেইন করতে পারো, or walk with kings like Ulysses did, right? With so many kings and so many cultures, walk with kings nor lose the common touch. সবার সাথে উঁচুদের সাথে উঠতেও বসতে পারবে, আবার নিচুদের সাথেও পারবে, both the bourgeois and the proletariat. If neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, যার শত্রুও বেশি থাকবে না, বন্ধুও বেশি থাকবে না, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, if you can utilize time, you do not become the slave to time, but if you can use time for your own improvement, for your own development, for your own utility, then if you can do all of these things, an unbreakable spirit, if you have, then yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Of course, a very gendered poem. I know. যেখানে ছেলেদের কথা বলবে, you're man, but then of course you have to, forgive him because he's writing in a particular time when women were not so much into jobs and working and outside the domestic sphere. They were still relegated to the domestic sphere. But nevertheless, it's a poem of inspiration. It is supposed to give, unlike the white man's burden, which has been greatly criticized, if that at least provides you with some kind of encouragement. Okay, so that kind of brings me to the end of Victorian poetry. I do not think I have done too much of a justice to something so broad and which is a very personal, favorite of mine. But I hope at least I have been able to show you through some of the sample poems the kind of the crisis, the kind of the conflicts, the kind of the problems that this generation of writers, of poets were facing, and how through their poetry they were basically trying to make sense of conflicts and challenges that they themselves were kind of being overwhelmed by. So poetry again must serve as a way of not only of self-expression, but to make sense of the world around you and to help others make sense of it, those who are not so expressive. So I think that is why even after so many years have gone, a century has passed, but this is why I think poems and poets like Tennyson and Browning and Arnold and Hardy still resonate with us, because they are still giving voice to the same strange disease of modern life that you and I are always facing and confronting on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so I hope if you have ever witnessed a personal crisis of faith in God, in each other, in humanity, in the society as a whole, if you have ever questioned your place in society, if you have ever questioned what kind of a human you are or what you are supposed to do with your life, I hope this lecture will provide some kind of a pointer of where to start reading when it comes to Victorian poetry. Thank you so much for being so patient.
Well, thank you, Abhinanda. Thank you for your excellent presentation. প্রায় 2.5 ঘন্টা ধরে কথা বলে যাওয়া ইয়ার কি নয়, কঠিন কাজ। So thank you once again. আমি এবার একটু কোয়েশ্চেন আনসার ইনভাইট করি, কারোর কোনো প্রশ্ন থাকলে বলো। Please feel free to ask questions.
তোমাদেরই জন্য লেকচার, কোনোটা যদি মনে হয়। সামিউল, yes, Samuel. Unmute. You can unmute and ask whatever question you have.
যদি কোনো প্রশ্ন থাকে আনমিউট করতে পারো এবং জিজ্ঞেস করো।
Yes, can we say now? Absolutely, we must say that the Victorian poets and writers, many of them, যেটা আমি I think clear করার চেষ্টা করলাম, especially poets like Browning, poets like Tennyson, I'm sorry, যখন একটা অফিশিয়াল ক্যাপাসিটিতে সে লিখছে চার্জ অফ দ্য লাইট ব্রিগেড, he knew the massacre that had happened, but he has to justify that. He has to, because that is his job as poet laureate. সুতরাং তাকে যে রুলার্সরা যে ডিসিশন নিচ্ছে সেটাও জাস্টিফাই করতে হবে, এবং তাকে সে পার্সোনালি অ্যাজ আ ম্যান সে যদি এগ্রি নাও করে তাহলেও অ্যাজ আ পোয়েট লরিয়েট তাকে সেটাকে সাপোর্ট করে জাস্টিফাই করতে হবে ইন ফ্রন্ট অফ দ্য ওয়াইডার রিডিং পাবলিক, right? And of course, somewhere when you are reading poems like Ulysses, যেটা আমি দেখানোর চেষ্টা করলাম যে এই যে মোটিভেশনটাকে প্রোভাইড করছে সেটা কিন্তু কলোনিয়ালিজমকে প্রোভাইড করছে, কিন্তু অ্যাট দ্য সেম টাইম যখন লোটাস ইটার্স পড়ছি তখন আমরা এটাও দেখতে পাচ্ছি যে একটা কনফ্লিক্টিং একটা পার্সপেক্টিভ, যেখানে ইজ অলসো অ্যাওয়্যার যে ওদের দেশের ওয়ার্কার্সরা কি কন্ডিশনে আছে, কিন্তু সেটা কিন্তু আমার মনে হয় না ট্রানজেন্ড করতে পারছে দ্য ন্যাশনাল ব্যারিয়ার্স টু ইনক্লুড কলোনাইজড পিপল লাইক ইউ অ্যান্ড মি। এইখানেই হয়তো একটা লিমিটেশন, তাই না অরিন্দম? তোমার কি মনে হয়? I personally feel that.
একদমই আমি সম্পূর্ণ একমত।
Is there any rational, Kaushik, is there any rational element in Victorian poetry? You've talked about how Marxism affected Victorian poetry. I think that's a very interesting question, Kaushik. Rationality, yes, why not? When you are consciously trying to deal with, the colonial project, when you're consciously trying to support some kind of an ideology or the other, সেখানে তো rationality থাকতেই হবে। সাপোর্ট করার জন্য একটা আইডিওলজিকে rationality লাগবে, ওটাকে কাউন্টার করার জন্য একটা কাউন্টার ডিসকোর্স দিয়ে কথা বলার জন্য সেখানে র্যাশনালিটি লাগবে। বাট অ্যাট দ্য সেম টাইম আমি কিন্তু বলবো না যে দে ওয়্যার ডিরেক্টলি ইনফ্লুয়েন্সড বাই সে মার্কসিজম অর সাইকোঅ্যানালিসিস অর এনি অফ দিস। বাট আমি যেটা বলতে চাইছি, এস্টাবলিশ করার চেষ্টা করছি যে একটাই প্লেগ্রাউন্ড, which is Victorian society, সেইখান থেকে, because these things were happening, everybody was coming into the awareness, the consciousness that yes, there are injustices, there are problems in the society, it is not as beautiful or as wonderful as we think it is, there are a lot of conflicts and contradictions that are inherent in this, and that we have to be able to resist it, we have to be able to recognize it, we have to talk about it. সেইটাই কেউ থিওরির মাধ্যমে করলেন, থিওরাইজ করলেন লাইক পিপল লাইক কার্ল মার্কস, আর কেউ কেউ লাইক ব্রাউনিং বা টেনিসন বা আর্নল্ড সেটাকে ভয়েস দিলেন থ্রু দেয়ার পোয়েট্রি। কোনোটার ইন্টেন্সিটি বেশি, কোনোটার ইন্টেন্সিটি কম। অফকোর্স দ্য রিডিং পাবলিকও ম্যাটার করে। পোয়েট্রি ওয়াজ ফর নিয়ারলি এভরিবডি, কিন্তু মার্কসিজম সবার জন্য ছিল না। ইট ওয়াজ ফর আ সিলেক্ট ফিউ ইন্টেলেকচুয়ালস অফ দ্য পিরিয়ড। সুতরাং সেই বেসটা হয়তো আলাদা, বাট রেশনালিটি, ইয়েস, এভরিথিং ওয়াজ ভেরি কনসিয়াসলি ডান। I am personally of that opinion.
Right.
Right.
আর কারোর কোনো প্রশ্ন?
Very good question.
Very good question indeed. আর কারোর কোনো প্রশ্ন থাকলে করতে পারো কমেন্ট সেকশনে, চ্যাট বক্সে বা মাইক্রোফোন অন করে।
Yes, but যদি তোমাদের যদি কোয়েশ্চেন না থাকে, যদি কোনো অবজারভেশনস থাকে, যদি মনে হয় কিছু শেয়ার করবে, আমার লেকচারে আর কি ইনক্লুড হলে তোমাদের ভালো হতো, সেটাও আমাকে বলতে পারো। ইউ ক্যান গিভ মি ফিডব্যাক, so I can maybe try to revise my own
Presentation. Yes, yeah.
presentation next time. I really apologize for that, mess up with that PPT.
না একেবারে।
Okay, I think there are no other questions or anything.
Okay. So as there are no other questions, we are wrapping up this session. So thank you, Professor Chakraborty. I would like to express my sincere gratitude for your excellent and comprehensive presentation on Victorian poetry. Your comprehensive coverage of the topic left a lasting impact on all the participants, including myself. Your deep understanding and the insightful analysis of the various aspects of the Victorian poetry, all the poets beginning from Tennyson to Browning to Arnold, the themes and the techniques of the Victorian poetry provided us with a rich and meaningful learning experience, and especially your ability to communicate complex ideas in a clear and engaging manner truly enhanced our understanding of this very historically significant literary period. So thank you, Abhinanda, once again.
For having me here.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, Shomi, Andrea Del Sato, Frali Polipi. There are so many, মানে যেটা আমি বললাম যে এইটুকু টাইমে সত্যি পারিনি কভার করতে, বাট আইডিয়াগুলো নাও যেতে শুরু করতে পারো।
Yeah, modeled on Renaissance Italy.
Absolutely.
Browning, yes.
Absolutely. You've been a wonderful audience, all of you. তোমরা continually interact করে গেছো, and if you have enjoyed or taken away anything, তাহলেও the whole exercise was worth it for me. Thank you. I always say I live for my students. Thank you.
Besh.
Thank you, Arindam, for having me.
Thank you. আমি রেকর্ডটা অফ করছি। আমি অভিনন্দন